P.O. Box 655, Cordova, Tennessee 38088. That's my report, sir.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Alderman Massey.
The Great Hall Commission will meet June 18th. The Environmental Commission met on June 7th. The Public Safety Education Commission met on June 4th. We talked about Safety City, which began this week. I'd also like to remind everybody as the liaison to the Public Safety Education Commission that we do have an event coming up this Saturday for first responders. It's a charity event that will benefit their children, help pay for costs for them to go to college. If you're able to attend, you can get tickets through GPAC, or you can go to their website and pick up tickets. They're $30. You can get a group rate of $20. And so I'd love to see everyone there. Please come out and support our first responders. And that concludes my report, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman. Alderman Owens.
Thanks, Mayor. On May 22nd, the Design Review Commission met, and some notable items that we approved were the Saddle Creek parking deck, the Germantown Village Square, some revisions to their paint schemes, as well as the building improvements to the former bank on North and West Street corners. On June 5th, the Planning Commission met and approved the site plan for the GPAC Grove Outdoor Amphitheater, as well as the Harvest Church parking lot expansion, which is down at Winchester and Forest Hill Irene. And last but certainly not least, the Parks and Recreation Commission will not be having its regular business meetings during June and July, but we do have two subcommittees that are going to be conducting work sessions over the summer. One is reviewing the youth sports operating policies, and the other is going to consider potential parkland acquisition sites in order to advance the park master plan. And these work sessions will be posted on the city's calendar and open to the public. That's it, Mayor.
Thank you, Alderman. And just quickly from the Mayor's office, just want to recognize Chief Beeman and Captain Nick Godwin for putting together a masterful active shooter presentation that they're taking out to the community. They recently trained everyone at Houston High a couple weeks ago. They've also been in front of the Mayor's Council of Faith, and they're going out to our churches as well. So if both chiefs can share that with those appropriate employees would be great. Also, I'd like to thank pretty much the entire city staff for putting on one of the best Germantown charity horse shows in years. People don't realize that if Parks and Rec, Fire, Police, General Services, Public Works, just the entire team is not getting the grounds in good shape and making sure everyone's safe, protected, and traffic flows well, then it can really be chaos at the horse show. I think there were record crowds this year, great weather as well. Other recognition, the city just received a $12,500 grant from the National Endowment for the Arts to partner with Arts Midwest for this year's Big Read, which will be the novel The Namesake. So we'd like to make sure Alexa Robinson gets some thanks for that as well. Sales tax numbers are up dramatically as usual. We were 14% over budget for the month of May. Cumulatively, we're up 12% across the city, and so I'll make my standard plea: shop local, dine local, because it pays off and it helps out local economy and city governing as well. And from the Memphis Area Association of Realtors, great numbers on our city. In the month of May, we were up 27, almost 28% in new sales in May, and also those prices for those homes were up a median of 10.5% up over last year. So that concludes my report from the Mayor's office. That brings us to item number 7 on the agenda, number 8 that is, citizens to be heard. We have one citizen who filled out a sheet. If Mr. Harold Steinberg could come forward to either podium, you'll have 3 minutes. Please just state your name and address for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My name is Harold Steinberg. I have something in my throat. I reside at 8377. We have such a dedicated staff here. It's just incredible. 8377 Willow Oak Road in Germantown. I rise to make complimentary remarks to the Financial Advisory Commission. I'm privileged to serve on that commission. We review the budgets for all the city departments. We get to know the department heads. We delve deeply into those budgets. And I would like to personally recognize a number of individuals, including one who's not here, our liaison to financial advisory, and that's Rocky Yonda, our alderman and liaison. In addition, I want to recognize Patrick, who's always there, has lots of answers for us. as well as Julius Moody and Russell Johnson, our chairman and vice chairman, who are in the back of the room. What do you mean, no? You're taking up my 3 minutes. In addition, there are a number of members of the committee here in the room. I'm not sure I saw them all, but I was sitting next to Clint Harden, who is probably the longest-term member of our commission, our committee. No? Somebody else is longer than you. Julius is back. All right. And also our dedicated budget and planning staff, 3 dedicated women who are in the back of the room. They ought to wave so everybody knows who they are. That concludes my submission. Who did I miss?
Julie Klein, let the record show.
Julie, and we got lots of people. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you for your service, Mr. Steinberg. We appreciate those comments. That takes us to the conclusion of citizens to be heard, and now we move to the consent agenda. As mentioned earlier, the consent agenda is rather lengthy, 25 items, 24 plus 1 that was added on. I will read through those quickly. Item 9A, agreement Forest Hill Irene traffic signal cost contribution. Item B, agreement public safety software annual maintenance. Item C, agreement sports provider Germantown Football League. Item D, annual agreement U.S. Geological Survey. Item E, bid rejection lateral G mitigation at Allenby Lake Spillway. Item F, change order number 1, club management software. Item G, contract amendment number 1, safe routes to school phase 1. Item H, contract amendment number 1, safe routes to school phase 2. Item I, contract education and outreach marketing. J, contract emergency wall repair at 2031 Myrtle Bend Drive. Item K, donations Germantown Community Library. Item L, donation and reimbursement, Parks and Recreation. Item M, lease extension number 1, Norfolk Southern Railroad Company, Depot Park. Item N, PEG disbursement to GMSD, 3rd quarter. Item O, purchase club group fitness programming. Item P, purchase network annual maintenance. Item Q, resolution 18R14, merchant services account and signature cards. Item R, right-of-way acquisition, Track 4, Forest Hill Irene Road improvements. Item S, right-of-way acquisition, Track 14, Forest Hill Irene Road improvements. Item T, right-of-way acquisition, Track 21, Forest Hill Irene Road improvements. Item U, right-of-way acquisition, Track 22, Forest Hill Irene Road improvements. Item V, right-of-way acquisition, Track 24, Forest Hill Irene Road improvements. Finally, Item W, right-of-way acquisition, Track 33, Forest Hill Irene Road improvements. Item X, wireless transmission facility modifications, AT&T equipment upgrade, 2027 South Germantown Road. And item Y, Item Y, supplement number 1, Germantown Road, Wolf River Boulevard, intersection improvement project, right-of-way appraisals, and closeout. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as modified?
Move to approve.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Alderman Massey?
Yes.
Alderman Owens?
Yes.
Alderman Barzizza?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Gibson?
Yes.
Consent agenda carries. Brings us to item number 10 on the agenda, ordinance number 2018-1, ordinance to adopt FY 2019 budget, second reading and public hearing. Mr. Lawton. Sure.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to let the budget team assemble here. You know the staff members, Adrian Royals, Sherry Rao, Dakisha Funden, Ralph Gabb, our part-time finance director, Jason Heisman, assistant city administrator, Kevin Jones, with the school district is a finance director for the school district, and of course, Jason Manuel is our superintendent. I will go through the presentation this evening and cover all of the funds. We do, however, have the chairman of the Financial Advisory Commission, Mr. Julius Moody, who will make a presentation to this body on the work of the commission following my presentation. And as Mr. Steinberg pointed out, we do have several members of the FAC with us this evening. So we'll begin and cover all of these various funds, Mayor, and also, just a reminder, you mentioned it, this is a public hearing on the document as well.
That is correct. Before you get started, I'd like the record to reflect that Alderman Yonda is here in attendance this evening. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. So there are several funds that comprise the budget. There's the general fund, there's enterprise funds, special revenue funds, and the capital budget. I will go through all of these with as much detail as possible, and then certainly staff will be available for answering any questions that you might have. Any specific departmental questions, say an expenditure in police or fire or procurement or HR, the department heads are here as well, and they're prepared to respond to those items as well. The budget really starts in January with the approval of the budget calendar by the board, mayor, and aldermen, and then ultimately by the finance committee. We had 5 meetings with the Financial Advisory Commission this year to go through all aspects of the budget. And in fact, we have another meeting scheduled this Thursday evening to discuss the capital outlay note for the school administration building that we discussed during our CIP meetings. But we're going to begin with the general fund. General fund summary. I will not read this PowerPoint to the board, but you can see this. You know, we raised property taxes a year ago. I'm happy to report that with the work that we've done this year and the department heads and city staff, that we're going to be able to move that property tax rate adjustment out to a 6th year. We had planned for 5 years, but we're going to be able to get yet a 6th year out of that same rate. Decisions, as we looked at the budget and build this document, they're based upon our long-range strategic plan and preserving core services throughout the city. It's a balanced budget. By that, I mean we make sure that we have adequate resources for operations and also for capital. And as staff was putting together the budget this year, it became clear that there are 3 major areas that we address in the document, and some of the areas that are of most importance to our residents, and that's city infrastructure, public safety, and education. Some of the revenue highlights, the mayor mentioned what's happening with our local option sales tax. $10.6 million is what we have projected in the FY19 budget. That's up from $9.2 in the FY18 budget. And those trends we see continue and continue and continue. And if you look at the economic development work that's taking place around the city, it's no surprise that we're making that level of projection. In fact, the estimate, I think we're going to probably finish close to 10.3 if we continue at this pace. Occupancy tax is up. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation on the budget, the property tax rate recommendation from first reading is to drop it to 2 cents to $1.95. This is a recapture year. Rather than get into that now, I'm going to have Mr. Gabb explain what that means when he presents the property tax agenda item. Some of the expenditure highlights, those are revenue highlights, expenditure highlights, working very closely with the city and GMSD on their capital needs. We're adding 3 new police officers to begin to build a new district in the city this year. And we'll probably continue that. We've also applied for grants through the Department of Justice and through FEMA for both police and fire for additional officers as well. If we receive those grants, we'll come back to the board with the recognition and approval of those grants. If you take out the debt service, and remember our debt service increased dramatically last year with the $34 million bond issue for the new school and the associated road improvements in front of the school, that debt is there, and it's big, but if you take that out, if you just look at what we're doing with capital and reserves and operating expenditures, the budget from 18 to 19 only increased by 2.7%. In addition to that 2.7%, you have to take in consideration there are a number of things that the city deals with that are, I wouldn't say beyond our control, but things that we have to manage and address every budget cycle. Group insurance, there's an increase of $372,900. Based upon our actuary, we're having to contribute an additional $419,000 for the pension plan. There's a general fund merit increase this year. This does not include the step increases for police and fire of $316,000. And, there's a public safety step increase of 411. So those things, as we go through and we think about that 2.7% increase, keep in mind that it incorporates just over $1.5 million in additional expenditures to the budget. The general fund supports these areas: public safety, performing arts, HR, court, capital financing, finance, and procurement. General fund revenues, just over $57 million. It's a 2% increase in revenues over the FY18 budget. As you know, we project our revenues very conservatively. It would be easy to pad this, if you will, and say we're going to bring in more, but our track record over the past 30 years has been to budget revenues low, keep a handle on expenditures, bring them in low, and build a healthy fund balance at the end of the day. General fund revenues break down like this. The largest category is property tax at 58%. That has been as high as 61 and 62% in the past. Now, absolutely, property tax is the city's bread and butter when it comes to providing the necessary revenues to run our day-to-day operation. But it's nice to see a little bit more of a not so much dependency on the property tax rate, a little bit more diversity in terms of our other forms of revenue, particularly sales tax, and that is the local sales tax, which now comprises 24% of the overall operating budget. That's been as low as 18, 19% in the past. So strong growth there, federal and state about the same as it's been, very little in interest and in licensing fees. Revenue categories, these are the major ones: property tax, local sales tax, investment income, federal and state revenues, other revenues. Property tax, again, is by far the largest at $32.8 million. That's the big blue line you see there. Sales tax is right behind that at $13.2 million, of which the local option is $10.6 million. We receive approximately $5.6 million in federal and state revenues. Most of that is the state sales tax that's collected. That's the 7% of the sales tax that's collected at the state level, and it comes back to the city on a per capita basis. Other revenues consist primarily of court costs and fines and franchise fees, and I don't even think investment income makes the mark. It's very little. Property tax by category. There are, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 major areas that comprise our property tax category. I mentioned 6 because there are several that consist of the in lieu of, and that's mainly TVA improvements that they pay a percentage of we receive a percentage of the gross revenues they pay to the state, comes back to the city of Germantown from TVA. MLGW payments are based upon the value of the asset in the ground and assessed at a 55% level. Most of that, again, is the current real property tax, the line that you see in blue, and the personal property tax. That's a tax on business and office equipment within a business. And as you can imagine, in the city of Germantown, with our wonderful medical community, those devices are rather expensive, but they contribute nicely to our property tax. You can see the increase in the 18 budget. That's due to the tax increase, and again, we budget very conservatively. You can hardly see the increase in 19, but it is a 2% increase in revenues. Property taxes as a percentage of general fund revenues, I went over that already. That talks about the strength of our property tax base. An increase in this line could begin to show a greater dependency on property taxes as opposed to a more diversified tax structure, and we certainly have that now in the city of Germantown. So it's fairly stable. Local sales tax, this is the half of the 2.75 that you pay for items in the city of Germantown. As Avera mentioned, shop Germantown first. You can see exactly where these dollars come from. We do not get the entire 2.75. Approximately half of that, or exactly half of that, comes back to the city of Germantown because it's site-based. In other words, where does the sale take place? Those dollars come back to us. The trustee will divide that in half, and the county uses that to fund education on a county basis. GMSD gets a portion of that sales tax as well, based on the ADA formula. So it supports our local government and also supports our school system as well. So nice growth in our local sales tax. And you can see it's quite remarkable going back. This 2010 is post-recession by at least a year, but you can see the increase in sales tax and what it's meant for our city. State sales tax allocation. This chart shows historically what's happened over time, and again, coming out of that recessionary period at the state level. State sales tax are critical for our state. There is no state income tax, as you know, and this is a major driver for state revenues. The mayor and I have met with Treasurer Lillard several times, and he stressed the importance of this. And the surplus it developed, yes, in 17 and 18, but our last conversation with Mr. Lillard said that surplus may not be as strong, but we still see steady growth in the state economy, and we're extremely proud of that. Of the 7%, about 4.6 is available to cities of that amount, and that comes back to us not on a situs base, point of sale, but more as on a per capita basis. Revenues per capita, this is an extremely important chart, one that the rating agencies look at. They don't want to see any wild fluctuations in this, so based on the revenue streams that I just went over, this is what every man, woman, and child in the city of Germantown from those general fund revenues pays to support the level of services that we have in our community. And as you can see, that this trend line, as we look at our 5-year projections, is extremely stable in terms of the taxes and the revenues that we expect our residents to pay for their services. A dramatic increase in this line, what this would show to the rating agencies is that we are having to charge more, we're having to collect more because our expenditures are starting to outpace our revenues. I have a very similar chart to this that will show the expenditures per capita as well. Let's talk about general fund expenses. I mentioned the increase was at 2.7, but if you factor in the debt service, and it's a real number that we pay on that additional debt that we just issued, the overall increase in the general fund is 6%. It's one thing to talk about the dollars that we spend, fees that we collect, taxes that we collect from our residents and folks visiting our community, but it's also important to talk about what do people value for the services that they receive? What are the results of the work that all the departments, the mayor and the board do, our commissions and committees provide in terms of services for our residents? So we also factor into, and one of the reasons we do the survey, it's important to understand the value that our expenditures and our city services add to the community. So I won't read these, but you can see, these very basic questions. It's either somewhat satisfied or very satisfied, and they are in the extremely, I would say, very high marks. And this is consistent, random survey after random survey after random survey that we perform during the year. Probably the last two, I think, the most important to me, I believe, is the overall value for my city services. You're talking to people and you say, do you receive value for the taxes that they pay? 81% of the folks in this random survey said yes, they're receiving services. So that's a good sign for what we're doing. The other is the Net Promoter Score. And it's a simple question. It says, would you recommend the city of Germantown as a place to live for friends or family? And 71 is an outstanding score. When you consider the experts who developed the Net Promoter Score said that 50 is considered excellent because you have detractors and you have supporters as well. The property tax allocation, $1.95, breaks down as this, with public safety receiving the lion's share of that $1.95. Of course, there are other revenues that come into the city, but if you want us to see just what the tax rate, the $1.95 that we pay, where it goes, it supports these levels of services, followed by general government, transportation and environment, community services, debt service, and other expenditures and reserves. And in a second, we're going to go through and look at a little more detail at the specific expenditure areas. Expense by category mirrors pretty much where the $1.95 goes. Most of our resources go to public safety and to general government and the other major department areas. So let's get into some of these areas in terms of the expenditures. This is a general government section, and it includes everything from aldermen down to budget and performance. I'm going to talk here in a minute about public safety and public works and community services. But overall, in this category, and the way it's in your budget document, the way you see it in the general fund summary, overall, we're looking at a 5.3% increase in general government expenditures from budget 18 to the budget proposed for FY19. Not a large expenditure increase, particularly when you consider, again, the $1.5 million in OPEB pension and health costs that are plugged into that. And the other area that I'm going to cover here in just a second is the amount that we have for infrastructure replacement. So we build and do things in two buckets. One is the major capital, where we issue debt and we use reserves. The other category is the infrastructure replacement program, where we're replacing ongoing items in each one of the departments. Deferred maintenance, if you will, on some areas. It's trucks, it's computer equipment, it's maintenance of certain items. All of those items, and I'll touch on those in just a second, are also included in that 5.3%. So again, I think staff has done a great job in trying to hold the line on expenditures where they have the discretion to do so. But when you plug in the amount for infrastructure replacement and you plug in the 1.5 across these departments for benefits, if you will, OPEB, pension, health insurance, that we do a really good job in trying to control, those are factored into that 5.3 as well. In general services, I mentioned the infrastructure replacement items. These are included in the general government amount. The additional boilers and new boilers in economic community development, work in the police department, the air handler and the pistol range, GPAC cooling towers, Station 4, Station 1 work, facility services, city signs. The city signs actually is phase one of a project that we'll be bringing to the board. I think, where's Reynold? The last meeting in June, we'll bring you those expenditures associated with that. Let me get my information. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, sorry. And then in GPAC, we're doing some work. The Marley floor is a liner that goes over the hardwood floor, beginning to replace the seats in the theater, phase one. I'll give Mr. Chandler a lot of credit. When Paul looks at his budget, he knows he can't do everything at once. So much like we phased in the curtains to be replaced at the theater because they lost their fire retardancy, we're also going to phase in the seats. Keep in mind those seats, although I think they're pretty comfortable. They've been around since we opened the doors in 1994, so it's time to change those. And some additional bistro tables and chairs. Information technology still in the general government portion. These are maintenance items that we have to keep up with. The network switches themselves, a large expense there at $150,000. Those are over 10 years old. Those truly are the lifeblood of our information technology system. We're looking at security camera replacement items and performance management software. These are included. So when we look at the IT budget, for example, and you're wondering, okay, what are the expenses, what's driving that expenditure or that increase in that budget? There's there's at least, what, $200,000, $250,000 in additional IT equipment, plus those benefit items that I mentioned as well. Looking at police and fire, there's a 7% increase in police. Again, that's primarily due to the infrastructure replacement items that I'll hit in just a second, and those other benefit items, health insurance, pension, that hits everybody's budget. That $1.5 million is allocated across all of the departments, and you're seeing that share in addition to the step increases for the officers and the merit when officers are out of the step plan. And the fire department, a 3% increase. That's their step plan and merit, and it's also the increase. There are no new positions there. It's also the increase in infrastructure replacement. So what are we looking at in terms of IRP for police and fire? There are additional police vehicles that we're going to be purchasing. Some of these are new. At least 3 are going to be new and tied to the new officers that we'll be hiring. And the others are the standard replacement vehicles that we try to replace the fleet at least every 3 years, or rotate a third of the fleet out, correct, Chief? At least every 3 years. So and it's based upon the mileage and the wear and tear on the vehicle, but to keep our equipment current and provide the best for our officers. We want to make sure we're on that 3-year replacement cycle. In fire, there's one additional, it's not new, let me back up. It's a replacement vehicle in fire, exhaust system at one of the stations, hazmat trailer ID, and a swift water trailer. We talked about the new fire engine in fire. That doesn't hit Chief Sailberg's operating budget. That will be part of the capital improvements plan, and I'll address that here in just a second. Much like the way we look at what do our citizens, our customers feel about the service that we provide, or the resources that the men and women in the fire department and police department have to work with. Very high scores here. Basic questions, compare it to living in other cities, 94%. Response time of fire department when called, that's actually up from last year from 84% to 86%. The same with the police response time. It's up from 90% to 92%. So very high marks from our residents. And I would say, the first question, safety compared to living in other cities, that's a feeling people have about the sense of safety and security and walking in their neighborhoods day and night. But response time, I dare say probably not everybody in our community or in that group that we sampled has called the police department or the fire department. It's that perception because they see our folks on the street, they know they're active, they see them leaving the stations. It's the perception and the reality, if you had to make that call, of the work that our police and fire department provide. Community services, again, I don't want to sound like I'm beating a dead horse, but you got to keep in mind that when we're looking at these increases in cost, it does include the IRP, and it does include those basic benefit, including pension and OPEB and health insurance, and the merit is factored in here. So in Parks Recreation, we're looking at a 5.7% increase. The Genealogy Center looks huge. I talked about this but it's not really when you look at the amount. This is taking on additional personnel that were being funded by the endowment that was created at the Genealogy Center. We're going through those dollars with that endowment, and it's probably not appropriate that we continue to fund staff positions out of that. So there are at least 3 or maybe 4 staff positions now included in 10-Gen that were being funded out of the endowment. Library services, that's our agreement with LS&S to provide the contract services for that operation. That 2.3 represents an increase in the contract amount. We have Lisa, how many years are left on our contract with LS&S? 3 more years, and an extension, perhaps. But this includes the costs associated with it. And the cultural art program, 13% increase. It looks big, but it's not really when you look at the dollars. That's our family and children's program, holiday parade, Pops in the Park, movie nights, festivals, and fun and fright. So the cost you see associated with that is trying to make those activities, those community activities, just a little bit better year after year as we can try to apply more resources. They too also have IRP items. There are 2 replacement vehicles in parks and an ATV to be used in the Greenway as we continue to construct more and more miles of Greenway. This is for safety and for our park rangers to patrol the Greenway. And the Arboretum, this is going to take place at Oak Lawn Gardens. If you haven't had a chance to look at the Arboretum that's there or the way the trees have been identified with Ms. Beasley and her staff, this will continue that work. Part of the $35,000 will go for a matching grant for tree planting, and some of those dollars will also go to remove hazardous trees on a site that need to come down, and also for path work for greater ADA accessibility into that park. Much like the others, when we talk about the work that we do, how does that translate? So what does that mean to our residents? Overall quality of the library, 90%. Available programs on recreation programs at 78%. Public Works Department consists of grounds and potable water, and that's our sewer area, but it's more animal control, sewer infrastructure, grounds, stormwater, parkland grounds, and maintenance. That's the work that takes place in Public Works, street repair, patching, all of those things. We're looking at a 12.8% increase in that budget, and that's primarily due, again, to those items that I'd mentioned regarding health insurance and OPEB and the merit package, but it also includes some rather expensive infrastructure replacement program items. Great alls aren't cheap, and so that is assigned to Mr. Mills' budget as well, hence the reason for the 12.8% increase in Public Works. These are those infrastructure items, closing in on $1 million. That's hitting Mr. Mills' budget for IRP, but they're things that are needed. There are things that are needed for the men and women in that department for safety, as well as just being able to do their jobs more efficiently and effectively. The Great All is an example of that. It doesn't quite hit the capital area, but it is an infrastructure replacement program. And those Public Works fleet vehicles, they're not new. These are replacement items in the fleet. We try to do a really good job about not adding new rolling stock to our facilities maintenance area or our fleet maintenance area, but we look at the vehicles that need to be replaced and replace those. Much like the Great All, I believe, Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, that is a replacement. That's not a new Great All. That is a replacement of an existing piece of equipment. Looking at the satisfaction, what does this truly mean to our customers and our residents who live here? High marks for the maintenance of our streets, high marks for our animal control, and high marks for our pavement lining, striping, curbs, gutters. I dare say if you were to go into other communities and attempt to ask these kind of questions, you would not get near these marks from our residents. So I mentioned earlier the revenues per capita. You also want to look at the expense per capita. What does it cost? So we looked at what everybody pays. What does it cost our folks who live in our community? The good news is that the expense per capita is less than the revenues per capita. You want to see that. That's the right direction. Awarding trend from the rating agencies in this area could indicate that our expenditures are outpacing our revenues, leading to deficit spending, which a lot of communities experience, and challenging our reserve levels. But that's not the case here based on our projections. What we see, our reserves are strong, and our revenues on a per capita basis exceed our expenditures. Debt service, Mayor and Board, as you know, we issued a large bond last year for the construction of the new elementary school and the associated public improvements in front of the road. Our overall general obligation outstanding bond indebtedness is just over $57 million. And you can see that drawn down in the outer years as we pay off our debt. Again, one of the things the rating agencies look at is they want to make sure that you can issue debt, and we have financial policies that control the amount of debt that we can issue. There are 4 metrics that we have to hit, and any one of those can stop an issue from going forward. But here you can see the gradual drawdown of our debt over time. So we're managing our debt, so we're not letting that control our budget. The debt service payment is still a very small component of the city's overall budget. So we're not letting our debt control what we can and can't do in providing services to the residents of this community. This also includes, and B&P staff, correct me if I'm wrong, this also includes planned bond issues in 2022 and 24. So when you look at this kind of kaleidoscope here of what's happening with the interest and principal payments, when we talk about the CIP, I'm going to mention 3 strategically planned bond issues to address a lot of our capital needs. That's factored in here as well when you go out to FY48, which is taking care of a lot of the debt service, principal, and interest payments. Our debt per capita, I mentioned for the metrics that we look at, which is a component of our financial policies. One of them is the debt per capita. We have in our financial policies a restriction that we will not exceed $2,000 in terms of debt per capita, of what every person would pay. And despite the large bond issue, and you can see that rise from 18 to 19, and including those 3 $5 million bond issues that I identified in 2022 and 24, we are still way under that warning mark. We don't want to exceed that. We're very proud of that, and you can see also we're proud of the fact that as we're going to be issuing that debt, in 2022 and 24, but we're also paying down debt. And that gives us a capacity to do additional projects. Again, we are not chained by the amount of debt that this community has. This is not a written financial policy, but one of the things that we look at when we're dealing with total expenditures and our fund balance, which is critical for the city, because the fund balance also includes a lot of the designated reserves that we have to capture in our budget to make sure that we have the debt service back for at least a year and at least a third of the property tax in the bank to pay our bills and emergencies and catastrophes and IRP. So for us, when we look at that last year, that 36%, we want to make sure that we cover all those designated reserves. But we also want to make sure that we have dollars available to pay for capital projects on an ongoing basis, so we're not constantly in the bond market adding more debt to the city. You can see the gradual drawdown of the fund balance. That's not an accident. That is actually by design. It coincides with the tax adjustment we put in a year ago, and this is a planned drawdown of the fund balance. Again, I'm pleased to say that it was supposed to end in FY22. We were able to get a 6th year out of that tax increase if everything holds true. Mayor and Board, now I'm going to move into the enterprise funds. So that was the general fund portion of the budget. Enterprise funds is a totally different category in terms of governmental accounting and how we look at things. The enterprise funds include the following. Enterprise funds in governmental accounting is a fund that provides goods or services for the public for a fee that makes the entity self-sustaining and self-supporting. It basically it follows generally acceptable accounting principles, as does a commercial enterprise as well. An example of this would be the utility fund. I call that out because it is the largest of the city's enterprise funds. So we count for these differently. And I'll go through these enterprise funds. Again, we have 5 enterprise funds. The first is a stormwater fund. There's no change in the rate structure on the stormwater fund. It's still approximately $3.50. Commercial areas pay a little bit more, and those areas with larger acreage pay a little bit more, but the average homeowner pays right at $3.50. This covers fund is based upon the formula that we arrived at when we were calculating that is based upon the expected rainwater runoff from parcels within our city. The expense side represents the costs associated with maintaining all of the drainage systems throughout the city. By that I mean the various conveyance mechanism, the ditches, the maintenance of those ditches throughout the city. And you know we have a lot of A through G, Tim? So we'll do major capital work on those laterals, but there's also just the day-to-day maintenance work that Mr. Mills and his folks perform. This also provides for the street sweeping out of this fund as well. And as you can imagine, keeping debris and things out of the curb and gutter in the street is greatly going to add to the quality of the water that enters the laterals and eventually the Wolf River. There's one project identified in the stormwater fund where we have pipes, not just open ditches, but pipe. This is the cured-in-place pipe drainage maintenance program that's been very successful that Mr. Mills and his folks do. We're asking for an additional $75,000 to continue that truly maintenance project that prevents problems down the road. The utility fund, again, another enterprise fund. There is no rate structure change in the utility fund now or in the projected future. Some of the highlights I will mention in the utility fund. This is the last year, I believe FY19 is the last year that we will have debt in the utility fund. All the debt that we've issued to construct the water treatment plants, both at Southern Expansion and at Johnson Road, that debt will be paid off. Those were 10 and 15-year revenue bonds backed by the full faith and credit of the city, but the good news is that debt service will be gone. And what it means is we have the flexibility in that fund to do more things because we've been responsible. The largest revenue source in the utility fund is the amount that we all pay for the metered water sales, right at $5.3 million. And the amount that we all pay as residents of Germantown for the sewer fee, right at $3.2 million. The operating expenses found with the operation of the utility plant provide for the operation and maintenance of 2 water treatment plants in our city at Southern and on Johnson Road, and the potential to produce up to $24 million gallons in water to almost 14,000 customers throughout our city. We provide the water to our customers, the 14,000, but in a drought condition or in other serious conditions, we have the capacity now to more than take care of the needs in our community with our 2 plants. The largest expense on the sewer side, so that was the revenue expenses, the water operating expenses. The largest 2 expense on the sewer side is the personnel associated with this, the IRP that I'm about to talk about, and the $1.5 million that we pay through our Evergreen agreement to the city of Memphis to treat our sewer. We don't have a sewer treatment plant in Germantown, so the agreement that was crafted back in 2003 allows us the ability to gravity feed, use of pump stations, move our sewage to the city of Memphis, but we pay them for the treatment of that. Utility fund, capital projects, and we'll touch on these when I go through the CIP. There's the water main that will go to the proposed new water tower in FY20, and of course to the new school. This project, Mr. Manuel, correct me if I'm wrong, has actually already been bid out, and it was part of the school's overall budget, moving that water line down in front of the school. We will pay for it out of the utility fund, but that was part of the overall project when the clearing of the ground and all that was prepared for site work for the new school site. The Western Area Gateway Sewer, this has been in the capital budget for a number of years. We did an extensive sewer study on this. This will provide sewer for the area that was rezoned smart growth, the Western Gateway area. I'll touch about that in more detail when I hit the CIP. Annexation lines, lines into the new annexation area to provide proper fire flows and greater pressure. And then phase 2 of a project that the board approved a couple meetings ago for upgrade to the electrical plants at the Southern Avenue plant, our oldest plant. IRP, again, that's the CIP, but these IRP projects are going to hit directly. The operations of the utility fund include a lot of maintenance work that we do every year on the sewer collection system to prevent backflows and backups into people's homes. I can't think of anything worse than the neighborhood coming up through your bathtub. There was a performance measure that Mr. Mills and I talked about a number of years ago to try to reduce that. At one point, we were up to 9 sewer backups a year. It seemed to be the average about 10 years ago, Bo. And I think we're down to maybe 0 this year. Yes. And that is due because of the level of maintenance that we put into the sewer system and the care that his folks put into it. Maintenance at the 2 towers, well field maintenance, ongoing maintenance, and the replacement of a Ford F-350 for the water plant. Sanitation fund, much like the other enterprise funds I just covered, there is no change to the rate structure for the sanitation fund. It's still $36.50 for backdoor, $29.50 for curbside, $19 for the high-density service, which would be the apartments and condos, I believe. This is the revenue that associated with the fee that we pay. There's no rate increase projected in this fund or during the 5-year planning period. If you looked at their budget book and you saw the drawdown on the fund balance in this particular fund, that is by design. So we can keep the service fee flat during the contract period and not adjust it every year for our residents, but rather build a fund balance, draw it down, and have a predictable fee for our residents. Operating expenses are up a little bit, and I'll touch on those in just a second. This is the 3rd year of a 5-year contract with Waste Pro. We are extremely pleased with the service that we're receiving from Waste Pro, and we can judge that by the fact that we are not out collecting garbage ourselves, or that we don't have to have a special dedicated group of employees assigned to man the phones for the many complaints that came in. So great contract, great service with our customers. We're seeing with Waste Pro, we're seeing more and more folks back away from backdoor and bring their trash down to the curb. Some of the things that's driving the increase in expenditure is a larger disposal for yard waste than we had anticipated. and the volatility in the recycling markets, we're actually paying more for recyclables, for the recycling companies to take our recyclables. We still need, and TDEC would be down on us very quickly if we did not recycle and try to take as much as we could out of the waste stream, but the market for recyclables is not there. So we are paying to have that disposed of. However, at the end of the day, the sanitation fund, if you look at the 5-year period, still has a positive net position as we go into the final year of that contract, and will give us some flexibility as we look at negotiating or looking at the next, I think at least we have another 5-year option with Waste Pro on their contract. Yeah. What? Okay. The athletic club, great success story here. Let me go back on that. These are the revenues associated with the athletic club. Mr. Rogers, as we do in all of our departments, budgets very conservatively. A 1% increase over FY18. We did a rate adjustment last year that this board approved and the athletic club commission approved. There is no rate adjustment anticipated in FY19 or during the 5-year planning period. That may change as we look at things, but that's not anticipated. 0.4% increase in expenses. You can see just here the why we continue to have net revenues over expenditures. There are over 6,000 primary memberships approximately at the club, and this represents over 13,000 individuals using the facility. This covers the recreation side, it covers the aquatic side, the training, everything associated with the operation of that facility. Some of the achievements this year, actually in FY17, we had excess revenue over expenditures of over $435,000. The net position anticipated for FY18, if everything holds true, will be close to $400,000. And many of us can remember a time when the city general fund was contributing at least that much, if not more, to the fund. So a true success story in taking this off of the back of the general fund and taxpayers. So if you're a member of that facility, you are paying for all those improvements. Projects and initiatives, we continue to renovate the club, put money back into the club. Those dollars, those excess revenues are plowed back into the club. Club floor renovations will include the mezzanine and the cafe shop where the old stairs were, be a nice cafe shop there. And then down below will be a lot of the things that folks like, the ping pong table, maybe some foosball tables or something in there for that level of recreation as well. And then we're also, in terms of IRP, and this hits Mr. Rogers' operating line as well, is the HVAC cooling towers. Those need to replace. They're as old, correct, Reynolds, as the facility, correct? So 25 years old, probably close to 30 years old in terms of maintenance and replacement. The Great Hall, another success story here. This just seems to get better and better and better in terms of bridging that gap between revenues and expenditures and not having the general fund cover the deficit associated with this fund. It was a right decision to maintain this fund as an enterprise fund. You can see the operating revenues. That gap, that deficit, is what the general fund will cover in FY19. However, you can see a very positive trend line here in the Great Hall revenues, and it continues to move in that direction. Staff is talking to Nick Dahl, the director there, and I'm sure Nick will be talking with the commission members in terms of when is the right time to tweak a change or an increase in the rentals for that facility. We try to keep it very marketable and competitive with the area, but there are not many facilities that can compete with the Great Hall. And this next chart shows you, is that the one? Let me get over to another one. No. So by 23, we anticipate, or is it 22, that there will not be a general fund transfer to the Great Hall. Do you guys have that? In 22. So at that point, we expect to be breaking even a little bit money going into reserves, and then certainly on our way, much like we've done with the athletic club. So those are the 5 enterprise funds. Next, I want to move into the special revenue funds. Special revenue funds, by definition, are established to ensure that the money collected for a particular program or activity is used for that specific purpose. Slightly different than the enterprise funds, but this is more revenue generated, has to be used for that purpose. An example of this would be, you see the State Street Aid on there. An example of this would be the gas tax money that we receive from the state, our portion of the gas tax money that comes back to us on a per capita basis. Those dollars per state statute have to be used for state street aid programs, and so that's a dedicated source of revenue. You can look at it that way if you want to support these areas. Where you see a gap between revenues and expenses in the let's see, how many we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8. Forgot GMSD. In the 8 areas, and Mr. Manuel, Mr. Jones can address GMSD, but where you see that gap in revenues and expenditures, that's going to be covered by a drawdown in that particular state or special revenue fund, the reserves that have accumulated over time to do more in terms of expenditures, whether it's in state street aid or the recreation fund. So let's talk about state street aid. State street aid, I'm happy to report that we are going to be able to do more in terms of street paving this year, though it doesn't show in this slide. We discussed this with the Financial Advisor Committee. I'm pleased to report that we're going to be able to add an additional $1 million to the street paving project contract. It was right at $1 million. We're going to be able to add an additional $1 million to the street paving project. Cost of commodities continue to go up. Whether or not we'll be able to pave twice as many streets, I don't think so. Bo will tell you no, but it is a move in the right direction. So the funding source for this comes from the money that we receive from gas tax, which is $1.3 million, and a $1.5 million transfer from the general fund to support this level of operations in our state street paving account. It also, not only the paving itself, the contract that we'll have with one of the major construction companies, but it also takes care of a lot of the routine street paving projects that Mr. Mills and his folks will work on, and it also pays for the street lights that we have, that we pay light, gas, and water for, or City of Memphis. So light, gas, and water? Light, gas, and water for the street lights. Thank you. Another enterprise fund is the Drug Asset Forfeiture Fund, and Chief can jump in if he likes, but we have a number of city police personnel who serve on various task forces associated with drug interdiction and enforcement, and these are the costs associated with that. We also receive fines and confiscations, and by statute, those dollars have to be used to continue to support drug enforcement operations that the police department has. And Richard, how many officers do we have in different task forces around the city and the county?
Right now, we currently have 5, and that's the United States Secret Service, 2 with the FBI, 1 with the DEA, and 1 with the West Tennessee Drug Task Force. In addition to that, obviously the drug seizures come in, but an example would be with the U.S. Secret Service. Those aren't drug enterprises, but manipulation of a credit card and those assets that are seized there don't go in the drug fund, they go in the asset forfeiture fund. And certainly our officers that make stops on the street, they actually seize property and evidence through the state. So those are basically, in summation, those 3 different funds.
Yes, so these are not tax dollars, these are not fines and fees, these are, well, there are fines and confiscations that we receive to support this fund. This is also subject to a separate audit from the general government budget as well, to make sure, again, that the dollars that come in these type of operations are used to support law enforcement in Germantown. The Pickering Center, great little asset in our community, just continues to do well. It has, I believe, a positive fund balance. There are a number of classes that are held at the Pickering Center. This, what you see in front of you, represents the professional fees that we pay the instructors who come in and do a number of things at the class, whether it's dancing or bridge, correct, Clint? or other items. And then there's also some capital outlay. We also want to we always try to do improvements to these facilities, make sure they're operating the way they should. We're looking at security card access to that facility and new cabinets in the kitchen area at the Pickering Center. The recreation fund, the largest area here, and this has grown since the school district started. Let me back up. So this covers all of our revenues and expenses, the fees that we collect for the various leagues, basketball, croquet, sports camp, Mayor's 5K, all those things. It goes to support uniforms, awards, and trophies. It goes to support a lot of the coaches and staff that we pay for these programs. But the largest component now of the recreation fund, and over time, let me back up, over time the recreation fund has done an outstanding job, and we've actually been able to use capital for the recreation fund to do work in our fields throughout, because we've accumulated a fund balance in those areas. But the largest area is the after-school program we have with GMSD, before and after-school program we have with GMSD through the REACH program. And you see the costs associated with the personnel there and the professional fees. This fund is self-supporting. The fees that come in through all of those programs, including the REACH program, go to support all those activities. There are no tax dollars involved in that operation. Federal Asset Forfeiture Fund, much like what Chief described, this is the personnel costs associated with that. Mainly, it goes to support overtime cost we have when we have officers that are called out to participate in any type of drug interdiction activity. Okay, and the last enterprise, no, there's two more. The ambulance fund, expenses are lower in FY19 because there is no capital outlay in the ambulance fund. Last year, we purchased the 6th ambulance out of the fund. The general fund transfer is going to be higher to the ambulance fund this year, primarily because we're transporting more and more patients on Medicare or Medicaid. Therefore, the insurance payments and reimbursements that we're receiving from that is not as great as what we'd anticipated. The fund is still doing exceptionally well. The service that's provided is exceptional. But here, since 2011, now we're still in the program. Those revenues aren't where we thought they would be in FY18, and so the general fund will be transferring more in FY19 for this program. The last special revenue fund is the Farm Park Fund. The most significant change here during the presentation of this item with the Financial Advisory Commission was recommended that the part-time farmer position at the farm park be changed to a full-time position to help support the activities at the farm park. And so that is the primary change there. But the other costs associated with this are to provide the programming, the needs associated with that park itself, and the farmers market that takes place every Thursday evening during the summer months. And then Germantown Municipal School District. These are the costs associated with this. Mr. Manuel and Kevin have made a presentation on GMSD. At the conclusion of my presentation, Mayor, if there's questions for either one of these two gentlemen, I'm sure they'd be more than happy to try and address those. There are some capital areas that I want to talk about at the conclusion of my presentation on the capital budget, which is next. But these are the costs associated with the Germantown Municipal School District. It is by far one of the largest components of the city's budget. You, as aldermen, by state statute, are required to, the district will approve their budget, and they go through a process very similar to ours. But per statute, the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, because the comptroller considers this a component unit of city government, you all are also asked to adopt their budget as well. Okay, so let's move into the CIP. I'm going to take another sip of water, Mayor. This is the capital improvement program for FY19. And again, these are only projects that the board will appropriate funding for in the upcoming fiscal year, July 1, 2018, or fiscal year 19. There is, in addition to this, a 5-year CIP that we prepare That 5-year CIP will be presented to the board in the form of a resolution at the June 25th meeting of the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. So you'll adopt that 5-year by resolution, but you're only appropriating funds for one fiscal year at a time. Current boards can't obligate future boards for financial commitments. We do that with bond issues, but in terms of programs like this, that's why the other CIP, the 5-year plan, is adopted by resolution. There are 28 projects in a proposed FY19 CIP in these major headings, from general government down to municipal schools. They're the major areas that touch our city and impact things that we do, from intersections to drainage to parks. Some of these, in terms of the athletic club and utilities, I've already covered, but I will address those again. The first project is, and I want to get something in front of me, Mayor, because I want to highlight for the board those projects where we are receiving state funding and where we are pulling money out of reserves. The Grove is the project we've discussed at length. In fact, it's making its way through the Planning Commission as we speak. This is a project that will be on the north side of GPAC. It will be an outdoor venue. I won't go into all the details. We can as we get into the CIP or the question and answer period. But the city, through a memorandum of understanding, agreed to support $2 million for this project with the Germantown GPAC Board of Directors, the foundation, raising the additional $2 million. And so we anticipate that happening in FY19. We want to do preliminary design work at Fire Station number 3, $100,000, and that is in the 5-year CIP for replacement. The elevator out here, as you know, has been down for some time. This will replace that elevator. And then the fire engine replacement will replace, at $860,000, will replace a 2003 fire engine that is on its last legs. Chief, are we going to put that in reserves or sell that? We'll put that in reserves. So general government totals $4.4 million. Major road projects, the Winchester Milling and Paving. This was a project we had MPO funding for in FY18. We were not able to get the project out the door for a number of reasons, but this will be a 19 project. It's coming out of, it's a federal share. That's 80-20. The feds, state and federal, will provide $1.1 million, and we'll provide close to $300,000 for this project. But this will be milling and paving Winchester from end to end in our corporate limits. Continuation of the culvert replacement project that is coming out of, I think that's 100% federally funded for the culvert replacement projects. And the Forest Hill widening right-of-way purchase, continuing that. We're about done with the acquisitions, and that will be coming out of general reserves as well. And the Forest Hill widening, the $6.3 million, that is the last of the portion of the bond issue and general fund dollars that we appropriated with the issue and will be budgeted in FY19. That's the widening and improvements from Winchester to Poplar Pike for that project. Intersection and other projects, Central Business Streetscape, that's a continuation of that work as part of the streetscaping plan that was approved by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen a couple of years ago, I believe. That will continue that project. It's a $500,000 project being funded out of the portion that we receive from the Hall income tax, continuation of the decorative street program, where the city provides a match and the residents or the neighbors provide the other portion to have those decorative street lights installed. The signal upgrades at just over $1 million, that is 100% coming from the federal government through the state, through the MPO to us for funding. That will be the decorative mast arms at Hacks Cross and Poplar Pike, Kirby and Poplar Pike at Germantown Road and Arthur. Those would be the decorative mast arms. The safe routes to school this evening, the reason I wanted to highlight those on the consent agenda is because at the third and final reading, when you see the CIP, that will change. This is what we thought we'd be receiving, and we are getting those dollars, but we thought the breakdown would be $139,000 for phase 1, 173 for Phase 2, but since this presentation was put together, that has changed. And I didn't want to be too presumptuous on what the board may or not have approved during the consent items, so I did not change those in the presentation. We will adjust those at third and final reading, but know that those two projects will change because of the additional work with the driveway aprons and the ADA improvements. Starting work, as mentioned this evening, this was the last right-of-way purchase for these improvements at Germantown Road and Wolf River. We'll begin that work this year, $3.8 million. The state has been great to work with in terms of providing additional dollars when we've needed it, certainly for the property acquisition, but also for the improvements overall. And then additional dollars for the work that we're doing on ADA transition, particularly with a lot of our sidewalk work. Master drainage plan, continuing that project at $150,000, and then the miscellaneous drainage improvements at $50,000. We'd like to have those dollars available to do capital work. It came in great when we had that emergency that was before the board this evening with that collapse, and I think we've used some of those dollars, additional dollars in FY18. The Parks and Recreation area, we're looking at wayfinding signage along the Greenway. That's a project that's currently under design, I believe, as we speak. At $50,000, that is coming out of reserves. The Greenway phase from Neshoba to East Trailhead, the new trailhead that we put in on Wolf River Boulevard, that is at $1.8 million. 80% of that is coming from, from the state government, with the city's share just being under $400,000. Phase 2 of the Farmington Playground renovation work, assuming we move forward with Phase 1 this evening, another $430,000 to complete that project in FY19. And then parkland acquisition. This came out of the discussion we had with the Aldermen during the work session on the budget, where we were talking about the need to purchase additional land for the Longfield complex. We thought the best we could do this year was to try to put some option money or earnest money down on a piece of property, and then work with Ms. Beasley and the Parks Commission on an extensive study of land available in the area to actually put that option down on a piece of property, but we've identified at least that much for that purpose. Athletic Club, I mentioned these projects already, the security cameras and the GAC renovation where the stairway was. Municipal schools, we identified $1.5 million in FY19 for boilers. I'm going to come back and Mayor at the conclusion of my presentation, and I want to discuss the administration's recommendation on that going forward. Keep in mind, again, this does not include the $5 million that we identified for the possible addition of Houston Middle, because that will be in the 5-year CIP that you will be asked to vote on in 2 weeks in the form of a resolution. Utilities, I won't go over these again. These are the projects that I identified in the utilities fund, enterprise fund, when we talked about those projects, $3.5 million in work in FY19. So here's how we fund these things. I tried to identify what was being funded by state and federal money and what was coming out of reserves. There is no bond issue planned in FY19, so these projects are coming from those sources I identified. Either reserves out of the general government, just over $16 million, utility fund reserves, athletic club, and GMSD we're pulling out of reserves, but it's going to fund. That's a general government drawdown that will go to fund those boiler replacements. The major funding categories, in addition to reserves, are hall tax. And at one point in time, we were receiving close to $3.5 million in hall tax that we could apply to capital. We're seeing a continued phase out of that amount. We're now at $1.6 million. We're fortunate to receive as much as we do in MPO grants through TDOT at $9.9 million. And we put a little bit of money in for contingencies, for projects that may come along that we're not aware of, or to support a capital project that after the bid letting is done, that may come in over budget, for a total, as I showed on the initial slide with the CIP, of $28,100,100 in capital work, again, only in FY19. Mayor, that concludes my presentation. I would like to make a recommendation, however, based on our work session with the Germantown Board of Education and follow-up discussions with Mr. Manuel and his folks and Mr. Heisman on the boiler system. So what the administration would like to recommend, and it really doesn't have a budget impact because we're moving one project funding to another, is we identified $1.5 million in boiler replacements in 19 and another 1.5 in FY20. Those are serious estimates on what that project may cost. It may cost more, it may cost less, but we've identified at least kind of as a placeholder because they have not finished, GMSD and their consultants have not finished the final plans and specifications. But this is a really best guess estimate of what we think it might be. So with that in mind, the administration is recommending that we allocate $1 million in FY19 to go to the boiler replacements, and then take $500,000 of that 1.5 we initially identified and provide that for the district for the immediate security needs that they identified at the schools. And the basis behind that, GMSD now has, I believe, Jason, Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, you now have a solid quote for $230,000 for the placement of additional cameras at each of our schools. And you've also identified a lot of the work to be done at Houston High School in terms of security. So they can use that $500,000 this summer and now to help support those security issues. But in addition to that, as we talked about in the work session on last Tuesday, a lot of work has been done already by the Germantown Police Department and city staff administration and GMSD, looking at what it takes to qualify for the governor's $30 million allocation of state grants for school security. However, this funding could take months to finalize. By the time we get the application done, there are a lot of school districts in the state. We don't know what that will translate to, but we will continue to work with police department, fire department, GMSD, our grant writer administration, in trying to make sure that we get our fair share of that $30 million allocation. So the recommendation would be to, of that 1.5, still allocate $1 million for the boiler system, and those dollars would be used probably late in fiscal year 19. And then as the cost estimates come in and we get a better idea what it is, we will sit down with the district and decide on how much more the city needs to put into the boiler system in FY20. But rather than scrap one project in favor of another, take $500,000 of the 1.5 and apply that this summer to the $500,000 security needs that the district identified and that we discussed last Tuesday. Mayor, that concludes my presentation on the budget this evening. I appreciate everyone's patience in going through that.
Thank you, Mr. Lawton. Let's go ahead and get a motion on the table and then open up a public hearing, and then we'll have time for questions of staff.
Mayor?
Yes.
Do you want Julius to present? Is that the time for him? I can't remember.
Or Chairman Moody, if you'd like to come forward and present now, that would be fine. If any of the Financial Advisory Commission members want to come up and join as well. I know that it's a tight group, and the chairman and vice chairman are here, and then we have several standing committees. Mr. Moody, you don't need to identify yourself for the record. We know who you are.
Okay.
We know where you live.
If any other FAC members?
Julie,
That'd be
Brian,
great.
Clint?
She'd rather stay comfortable, Mr. Chairman. Go ahead.
She's been on the committee longer than me. She just took a year off. I think I was 2005. Well, thank you, Mayor. You all have, I believe, before you the letter that I sent to you. And I'm just going to read it for the record tonight. This is the 2018 report to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen by the City of Germantown Financial Advisory Commission of the FY19 proposed budget. This year, the FAC had 23 members from across the community. The members represented a solid yet diverse group with significant combined experience in finance. Most of the members were in their second, third, or more years to the city. As a result, we had a good mix of new ideas and perspectives from across a
broad cross-section of our community. As in years past, many members were already familiar with the city's budgetary processes and able to compare this year's budget with those in prior years. The FAC continues to take great pride in the city's financial stability ratings, prudence, and vision. The FAC's role is to provide advice and to evaluate the financial soundness of the proposed FY19 budget and policies. We met 5 times with outstanding member participation and attendance at each meeting to review the staff's presentation of the key components, as Patrick discussed tonight: the general fund, special revenue funds, enterprise funds, capital improvement projects, infrastructure replacement program, as well as the financial policies. These components were reviewed in the context of several factors: the city's immediate needs for FY19, summaries of actual revenues and expenditures in prior years, and future needs and fund balance reserves sufficient to provide adequate resources to support defined service levels and provide financial resources that are consistent with city financial policies. At the introductory meeting, a review of the budget calendar was approved and a discussion was held on the role of the FAC. The second meeting was dedicated to a review of the city's enterprise funds for FY19, including the utility fund, the Germantown Athletic Club, Great Hall, sanitation, and stormwater. Generally accepted accounting principles requires local governments to use the enterprise fund type to account for business type activities, similar to those found in the private sector. These business type activities include services primarily funded through user charges. The third meeting focused on a review of the capital improvements for all funds, as well as financial plan to address the various capital needs of the city. There's no bond issue included in the FY19 budget for capital improvements. The fourth meeting was a review for the special revenue funds. Special revenue funds are used within city governments to record proceeds from certain revenue sources for which fund usage is restricted. An example of this would be State Street aid funds with restricted state revenues from the gas tax. The largest of the city's special revenue funds is Germantown Municipal School District. The superintendent presented the GMSD budget to the FAC, who in turn endorsed the school's budget. So the fifth and final meeting was dedicated to the general fund revenues and expenditures. The FAC endorsed the general fund with the same tax rate, 197, approved in FY18. Discussion between FAC members and staff on all matters were open and very professional. Any questions brought up by the FAC members were either answered promptly at the commission meeting, or staff researched the questions and came back to us with answers at the following meetings or through emails. The FAC refers to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen to the minutes of these meetings for further details on these discussions. The FAC recognizes their role in the process of establishing a budget as an advisory group. With this said, the FAC approved the FY19 budget presented as an advisory commission and passed the policy decision on to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. As FAC chairman, I also serve as a member of the Financial Audit Commission. The Financial Audit Commission voted to accept the FY17 financial audit as presented. The accounting firm of Watkins Uberall issued an unmodified or clean report with no exception noted during the audit on the financial statements. I believe that meeting was in March or something this year, and as it always is. The city was issued the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award again, and the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting from the Government Finance Officers Association for the 32nd and 36th consecutive years, respectively. That's pretty amazing. I'll say that again, 32nd and 36th consecutive years, respectively. I believe I was in 6th grade the first time they won the award. On behalf of the entire FAC, we thank Alderman Yonda for permitting the FAC to operate in a very open and frank manner. I want to state our confidence in the full staff whom we dealt. Mr. Lawton, Jason, Adrian, Sherry, Keisha, and everybody else that attended. Some of our meetings were over 3 hours. to no fault of my own, hopefully. Their willingness to research and share information was excellent. Also, the various staff of the city, Chief Selberg, Jeff Beeman, Chief Hall, Cameron Ross, Bo Mills, Joe Nunez, Phil Rogers, Steve Walensky, Pam Beasley, Reynold Douglas, and others. I think I can speak for the full commission in saying we are very fortunate to have our city finances in the hands of such capable staff. Finally, we appreciated the opportunity to serve mayor and aldermen representing the citizens of the city in such an open environment. We encourage that every action of the board of mayor and aldermen continue to be addressed from the perspective of maintaining sound and sustainable financial footing to preserve our quality of life within the spirit of the Germantown Forward 2030 goals and objectives. Sincerely, Julius Moody.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We do appreciate your report. We appreciate the service of the Financial Advisory Commission. As a former member of that commission myself, and also as an alderman liaison, I can tell you that I learned valuable lessons by being on that commission and serving in that capacity for many years. So we appreciate your work greatly. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's go ahead and get this motion on the table, and then we'll open up a public hearing. Is there a motion to approve on second reading ordinance number 2018-1, tentatively approving the FY19 proposed budget and to set Monday, June 25th, 2018 for third and final reading?
Move to approve.
Is a motion?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. This time I will declare a public hearing. And now a public hearing is open. If anyone who would like to come forward and speak toward this particular agenda item on the budget, please come forward and speak now. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak to the budget this year? Third and final call. Anyone who would like to come forward? Seeing no one come forward, that concludes the public hearing portion of this agenda item. We return to the motion on the table, and where staff and others are available for comments, questions, the floor is open. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Just wanted to be brief since we have been here for quite a while. The passing of the budget is one of the most important things that I will do as an alderman, and I take this very seriously. Each one of us has our own process that we go through to ensure that we're exercising due diligence to ask those important questions that our citizens expect for us to do. I began in January with staff and department heads related to what those needs are, asking Mr. Mills, learning more about drainage issues than I really need to know, but important. Safety of our community with our fire and police, our infrastructure needs, again, with public works, quality of life interests with Parks and Rec, our library, performing arts center, athletic center, all the schools within our community who are working day in and day out to ensure that educational opportunities exist for our students. Those key meetings with Superintendent Manuel, with your staff, with each of the Board of Education members, all but one, was key to my process for this budget cycle. So I thank you, each of you, for taking that time to meet with me. I would like to offer thanks, especially while the members of the Financial Advisory Commission are here. Thank you. I was with you in some of those meetings, but again, you did the yeoman's work. Want to talk to our budget and performance team. You are always thought of collectively, but Dakisha, Sherry, Adrian, thank you for the work that you put in. Staff and administration for the thoughtful and deliberate work that went into the making of this budget. We are in that second reading. The budget is a fluid process until we get to that final reading, and I appreciate the input that I've heard from citizens, appreciate the thoughtful way that we will deliberate tonight. Those are my remarks. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Floor is open. Alderman Barzizza.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess it would be to the budget staff or someone down there. What percentage increase in sales taxes have we received over the last 3 years or 4 years? Do you have any idea?
John, I can answer part of that. We can provide you with the historical, but The local option sales tax is, I believe, up 15% from 18 to 19 is what we're looking at. And it's been probably close to that over the past several years.
So it's roughly an aggregate of 15, 18% over the last 4 years?
15 for this year for sure, but we can get you the history.
Well, I look at the, based on that comment, those numbers, and reaching back in time when the 0.25% increase in sales tax was voted on by the public, I don't see any appreciable increase in of 15 to 18% in our contribution to the Germantown Municipal School District.
Well, keep in mind that the half-cent sales tax referendum was not, there's a difference between that and the maintenance of effort. The half-cent sales tax was a separate referendum approved by this board in terms of creating the ordinance to establish the referendum on a vote, but a separate vote. But nowhere in the question that was posed to the public when they voted was there a tie to education. There is a maintenance of effort responsibility that we absolutely provide, and that's at $2.4 million, but that maintenance of effort per state statute is based upon what 15 cents on the property tax rate would generate. And I can share you, we absolutely cover the maintenance of effort number, but the sales tax number is all part of the general fund. What we're required to do is that maintenance of effort 15-cent equivalent on the property tax, but as you know, we do more than that in terms of debt service and paying the settlement payment for the district on an annual basis and debt service payments and SROs. So there is a maintenance of effort, but I want the board to be clear that the half-cent sales tax is not tied to the school district. Those were additional revenues for the city. 2011, when we started this process, we were looking at ways that we could manage our budget during that period of time without a tax increase. The half-cent sales tax was available to us, but it is not tied in any form or fashion to the schools.
Well, if I remember right, the sales tax at the time prior to the vote was 9.5%. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, and we went to 9.75%.
Right.
So that's just 1/4 of 1%. One quarter.
Right.
Okay. Many people have contacted me and asked and mentioned that was the assumption, or at least it was the way it was described to them, that 1/4 of 1% was going to go to the schools. I've had many people come to me about that.
That's not the way the referendum was worded. When people went to the polls to vote, they knew exactly what they were voting on, and there was absolutely no reference to that supporting education. The maintenance of effort, absolutely, yes, that we provide that. But if you look at the maintenance of effort, plus just a couple of these, what we provide for school resource officers at $562,000, and the Shelby County settlement payment of $355, 15 cent is the equivalent on the tax rate that we should pay of $2.4 million. But if you look at the $1.95, just that alone, we're providing $3.4 million for the district, or 21 cents of the property tax rate, more than the 15 cent. But the sales tax is a separate animal, and the referendum did not link it to supporting education.
Patrick, address the federal lawsuit, because that adds credence to the question, the referendum, the judge, if you could just share that with the board and the community.
Yes, for those of you who are involved at that time, you know, we began this process in 2011. We had a lawsuit filed in 2012 against the municipalities in the county, by the county, alleging that we were creating discriminatory school districts, segregated school systems within the county. We lost phase one of that. And Judge Mays, we lost that in 2013, I think is when it came down, or 12. The decision came down. It came down in November of 2012. And Judge Mays spent a lot of time, staff and school superintendents spent a lot of time in the courtroom during that summer and fall. So the judge to support my comment about the sales tax not being tied to education, the judge threw everything out. He threw out the referendum establishing the school system. He threw out every action that this body had taken to establish a school system except one. And he did not touch the half-cent sales tax because it was not linked to the creation of a school system.
All right, I have another question.
Go ahead.
A comment, actually, then a question. I'm glad that $500,000 has been put into the security needs, and as I addressed it at the joint work session the other day, that I felt that we really needed to study it, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the state grant monies may come. And will those state grant monies offset the $500,000 where we could possibly put that $500 back into with the $1 million to go towards the boilers?
Yes, it depends on the timing of that, Alderman Barzizza, when the dollars come in. We're just now in the infancy of that grant application process, trying to get the $30 million. The $500 will be available, assuming adoption of the budget, for the district to use for those security reasons. As part of their facility planning process, and as the district gets more into what are their additional safety and security needs, that's where we'll focus. Whatever we get from the $30 million will go to support additional safety and security.
So this question is for the schools, school board, or GMSD. Are you satisfied with the $1 million and at the latter part of the fiscal year? And how soon do you think you'll know what monies will be available actually or needed to pay for the boilers?
So first of all, this is work that we did with the city administration, so we're thankful for that process. To answer your question, that's plenty of money for the first part of the project. Know that we're talking about the month of June. So as we're talking about making these renovations to the school, Jason, yeah. Can you hear me now? Okay, I just need to get closer. Yeah, so when we look at this project, we're really talking about it. We always have to stagger or straddle 2 fiscal years because we cannot do a lot of the work, especially if we're talking about Riverdale's boiler and chiller. We're talking about ripping out all of the ceilings, replacing the piping, all the wiring up in there. That has to be done in the summer. So this project already was going to straddle 2 fiscal years. It was going to be in this current fiscal year, so it was going to be half of it in 19 and half of it in 20. So we were talking about the likelihood of all of that $1.5 million being used just in June. It's probably not likely. Most of it's probably going to be on that backside. So that's why we were thankful for the fact that if this $500,000 is used towards safety, and if it does come back more than the $2.5 million, which I think we're currently allotting for that project, then we can readdress this body for those funds for fiscal year 20. This would be something that we would be tracking as we're ongoing. So we're thankful for the process to look at safety first, and then as we bid the project, we'll know the exact cost.
Thank you.
Floor is open. Alderman Yonda.
Yes, I want to point out that I don't think anybody believes that we haven't spent more money on the schools every year. If I'm not mistaken, if we pass this budget, we'll be at 42 cents of our $1.95, which is 27 cents more than our, is that correct, Mr. Lawton? Are we going to be at 40, based on the number that we have given that we're going to be approving?
If you look at everything associated with, and if the district, we were considered to be a department of the city, and it's a component unit, but the funding is different. As we put out in the budget and brief, it's the third largest expenditure that we have, but it's more than just school resource officers, maintenance of effort at 2.4, and a settlement payment. You also have to factor in, because it's real operating dollars off the top, the debt service payments that the city is making on both Riverdale and on the new school as well. And then when you factor in the additional capital work we want to do this year, which is coming out of reserves, that's coming right out of the top, out of reserves, the 1.5, however we slice it with security and boilers, and the $200,000 for the field house. And if you look at the portion of the roadway in front of the school, we're closer to $7 million in terms of direct financial support, which you're right. And Alderman Yon, you know this from from the work on the FAC, it's probably closer to 42 cents of the $1.95 that we provide. So keep in mind, the maintenance of effort is 15-cent equivalent of the assessed value, or excuse me, what the property tax would generate. But when we look at what we currently do, and I want to stress something, that we have a terrific relationship with the administration at the Germantown Board of Education. And when I say it's the 42 cents, we're building this partnership, and we've built this year after year after year. So these are things that we want to do collectively. We want to see the district succeed. We know the level of deferred maintenance. This isn't something we do grudgingly. We do this because we're partners, and we want to make sure that their priorities get factored into our priorities. And if we need to do additional work, we'll do additional work. So I think since the time we began this relationship, we've truly formed that partnership. And it's a give and take. When Jason comes to the finance committee, he knows he's not going to get all the capital he wants. And Harold and Russell are going to grill him on projects and what the district looks like. And you said that building would be 20 million, and it came in at 27. So I mean, there's a healthy respect back and forth, and we want that 42 cents. We're proud of that, and we want to see that strength continue.
But Mr. Manuel, I left the meeting this last week with the understanding that we felt that with our partnership and your work with Mr. Heisman, that we will be through with everything we really need to do by FY23 or 22, right around there. So we're on track to have everything, including all that deferred maintenance that we have from Shelby County Schools and everything. Considering they waited 25 years.
Yes.
They held off for 25 years, and we're knocking it out pretty quick. Okay.
Yeah, this was the first time that we are excited because we see the light in the tunnel of the coordinator with Mr. Heisman, that we can see a funding path. And this was tied into what Mr. Lawton was saying, that looking at the city, when they are looking at when they would go to bond, and I think they were saying 2022, 24, that's why it's a perfect formula for us. Our facilities committee will be meeting again in October to look at the outline to make sure that we can keep that partnership. And once again, we'll be looking at enrollment numbers that we'll be presenting to your body so that we can make sure we're heading in the right path. But yes, this is the first time since I started in the district that we really see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Okay. And I also left that with the fact that you had made a presentation that gave 100% build out, and the feelings that the things that you have projected over these next 5 years will be okay if we have 100% build out of every lot, everything as far as apartments and everything. Is that correct?
For elementary, yes. And remember, that's the middle school is the one where we have.
If we have a $5 million, we're going to do the expansion.
If we have a middle school, middle school, yes.
And
we can accommodate all the growth for the build out of the city if we have the middle school expansion and assuming that.
And we're planning. That's on our CIP. So we're planning on that. Okay. Thank you. That settles that.
Thank you, Alderman. Questions? Alderman Massey?
Mr. Manuel, when you presented to the FAC, which recommendations for your CIP did you present to them?
So you saw the same slides that they did at the FAC. It's the spreadsheet that shows the fiscal year 18 and the projects that our board had identified, and it has the pull-out slide that shows the 3 projects that our school board said were the highest priorities to them. So when we talk about the ADA upgrades at Dogwood Elementary School, we talked about the security needs for the school district. We talked about Riverdale Boiler and Childers. So I don't know if you remember that slide in the presentation. Those are the ones that I presented to the FAC, and of course everybody has the 5-year CIP list that we have.
So you presented the security upgrades at $500,000, and you presented the $600,000 for the ADA upgrades to the FAC.
Yes, sir.
And did the FAC recommend that the BMA approve those budget items?
They did not. I do not believe that they acted on that, but I couldn't speak for the FAC at that time.
I'll ask them. Was there any discussion or recommendations of changes to your budget at the FAC, or did they adopt what was presented to them?
Once again, you'd have to check. I think they adopted what was presented to them, but I know there was discussion, and I know you were there too, when they were talking about the security. I think that was something of interest to the FAC, that at that time they were talking about the security needs in light of what we've experienced recently. think there were also questions about the security analyst position, your security coordinator position. There were questions about that, but I don't believe there was an actual vote on the security upgrades.
When the budget was presented to the BMA, the only thing that the administration brought forward to us was the $1.5 million for the boiler and then the $200,000 for the field house. So I think the fact that tonight the administration is recommending that we make these security upgrades as a direct result of the joint meeting between the BMA and the school board demonstrates exactly how important it is for those two bodies to get together as a whole and make these decisions together, because before we met together, those items were left out of our budget. So I'm just asking that going forward, we meet together, we work together so that we can get an idea of what's best for the school board and possibly put our collective minds together and create the right funding for the schools. I'm very pleased that we're adding the security. I personally would have liked to seen $600,000 for the Dogwood ADA upgrades. We just spent, I think, half that making ADA upgrades for the library. I don't see any reason why we as a funding body can't do that for the schools now. And as far as this talk about you know, what the city has to pay, whether that half-cent sales tax should have gone to you or not, the way that was represented to the public on the front end is that the half-cent sales tax would be sufficient to fund the schools. Now, when the language in the referendum was actually drafted, that was changed. And so technically, it's true that the referendum did not apply to the schools, but that's not the way it was sold to the public. So people wanted that half-cent sales tax to go to the school. Before the school board was ever formed, there were city officials who made the decisions to take on that deferred maintenance. It is my opinion that the board has an obligation that they took on themselves when they started the school system to fund all that. We're not doing you a favor by funding that deferred maintenance. And when I hear some of my colleagues talking, they want to convince the public that we're doing you a favor. It's not a favor. It's our responsibility. Okay? Does that make sense?
Do you conclude the floor, sir?
I'd like to ask Mr. Moody if they made any recommendations regarding any changes to the school board budget or to the budget as presented by the administration. No. So both budgets were adopted as presented. And when the administration gave their presentation to you, did they give you the presentation based on the $1.97 tax rate or the $1.95 tax rate?
It was presented as $1.97. We had a chain of emails talking about, they presented that there was a 4-cent or 2-cent.
You have to come up here to the meeting.
Did the FAC ever vote on the Alderman Yonda? When you're moving down there, it's very distracting. I know you may not like these questions, but they need to be asked.
I was going to ask if Ms. Chairman Moody could come forward because I think we need to get this on the record.
Well, I think that's fine. Clerk, have you caught what he's been saying back there?
Chairman Moody,
And how I
please come
sit
forward.
has no bearing on anything that
Well,
you're
when
saying.
you move around and you grunt and you make noise, it is very distracting.
I've made no noises, sir.
Alderman, please continue with your questions.
Well, let's stop the time and allow Mr. Moody to get up to the front and address some of these questions. Well, the first question I think that we began with was, did the FAC make any recommendations for changes to either the GMSD budget or to the administration's budget?
We just voted to approve as presented.
Okay. You didn't make any. Did you make any recommendations?
No.
Okay. When the administration gave the presentation to the FAC, which tax rate did they present?
$1.97.
Mayor, if I could clarify
No,
this.
I still have the floor. I'd rather
Yeah.
Mr. Moody address it.
Yeah,
He's
I can't
helping
remember.
him with his memory. Go ahead.
Well,
Yeah.
he doesn't need help. He doesn't need to be led to his answer. So, Mr.
Well,
Moody, I'm not in this.
Mr. Lawton presented that evening, so he can attest to what he presented.
I'm not asking Mr. Lawton, though. I'm asking the chair of the Financial Advisory Commission. And there's a reason I'm asking him and not asking Mr. Lawton. Go ahead, Mr. Moody. Thank you.
okay.
Continue, please.
I believe it was $1.97 with the 4-cent buffer.
Has the FAC ever voted on the $1.95 rate?
I don't remember.
We're talking about the emails. The $1.95 email.
No, my question is simply, did the FAC ever vote on the $1.95 rate?
We voted on a 2-cent reduction.
When did you vote on the 2-cent reduction?
Whatever the fifth and last meeting.
You voted on the $1.95 rate. Did
That's
you
correct.
vote on that $1.95 rate at the first meeting where the administration gave the presentation?
Say that again?
At what point, how were you asked to vote for the $1.95 rate? How did this come about? You voted on the $1.97 rate, and so at what point were you asked to vote on the $1.95 rate, and who asked you?
I believe it was discussed at the 4th meeting, and then on the 5th meeting, we came to the conclusion of the $1.95 rate.
How was that vote taken?
Sure. Mr. Lawton, go ahead and clarify.
I need to clarify, and I don't think, the chairman of our commission should be under cross-examination, and if you think I'm being political, he's done a great job with this commission, and I don't think that's fair.
I'm sorry,
At the
point of
final,
inquiry,
at the
what
final
do you mean
reading,
by cross-examination? We're asking questions
Alderman,
about the budget.
Alderman,
So
go
I-
ahead.
at the
Go ahead.
final meeting of the Financial Advisory Commission, when we discussed the general fund, the administration clearly presented the tax rate at $1.97. You can go back and look at the minutes. It was $1.97. We discussed the whole appeal process, the fact that we were granted 4 cents, that we had 2 cents. If we wanted to drop it, it could go to the $1.95, but the administration, we were concerned about the continuation of appeals and how it might erode the tax base. But what was recommended by the administration on April 24th and what was adopted by the Financial Advisory Commission was the $1.97 rate. You can look at the minutes, it's clear.
Thank you, Mr. Lawton.
Well, at what point and how did you vote to approve the $1.95? I'm trying to find out how you deliberated on this to arrive at the $1.95 rate. I mean, it's not a cross-examination.
No,
I'm just trying to
just
find where that exists.
I don't remember the process. It's 2 months ago.
Would you go to the microphone?
The clarification of that is that the 4 cents was set aside for people who would ask that their appraisals be adjusted because they thought they were too high. At this point, the number of people who had requested that their appraisals be adjusted was much lower than what the state had said to anticipate. And based on that, it appeared that we could use 2 cents rather than the 4 cents and give the residents back 2 cents of what we had anticipated would be an appropriate tax rate and make it $1.95 instead of $1.97. And that is what the FAC voted on.
I think I understand why you voted on it. I just don't know how
Alderman
that
Massey,
vote
please
took
conclude your
place.
comments. You're at your over your
so-
10 minutes.
At the last meeting, Alderman Yonda did mention that there was votes cast by email, but I'm more interested in how you deliberated on this issue because, like me, the packet that we received had the budget based on a $1.97 rate. And so were there ever any deliberations as a body on the $1.95 rate? Or was it all done by email?
It was.
Mayor, if I could
Go ahead.
clarify
Go,
again.
Mr. Lawton, go ahead.
If I could clarify.
This concludes this round of questioning now.
If
Go
I
ahead.
could clarify, it was what was presented again at the final meeting on the general fund when we discussed the tax rate. Because of my concern, particularly about the appeals, as Julie mentioned, that might continue the road to tax base. The recommendation was at $1.97. That's what the Finance Committee voted on. On April 26, we received a letter from the Comptroller's office to the Mayor's office that states you've only used 2 cents. And so the Mayor at the first reading on the budget recommended let's drop it to $1.95. The board asked that the Finance Committee take a look at that. I'm sure Alderman Yonda suggested that. And through a series of emails, Alderman Yonda sent an email to the members of the FAC committee trying to keep them informed to say, you all approved $1.97, but the mayor's office is recommending we drop it to $1.95. Give me your feedback. There was no deliberation of that body. There was no official vote taken. So far as the FAC was concerned, their last meeting, that fifth meeting, was to vote on the $1.97, which they did, and that's why you saw it in the ordinance at first reading on the document. It wasn't until the mayor suggested let's drop it based upon the letter from the Comptroller's office that the recommendation came forward to put it at $1.95. And Alderman Yonda wanted to make sure that his Finance Committee was aware of that recommendation going forward. But again, what the Finance Committee voted on, and you can go to the minutes of that last meeting, was $1.97.
Mayor,
I'll ask my colleagues
Mr. Lawton.
to
briefly, I understand my time, but I
Yeah,
just
your
want
time-
the,
you have a second round.
I just want the record to show, Mayor,
Alderman
that I
Massey,
requested those emails.
you no
and
longer have the
and
floor.
the administration
Alderman Owens.
didn't produce them for me.
Alderman Owens.
Thank you, Mayor. I've stated this before, and it bears repeating, so I'm just going to read some of my notes. We are a process-driven city, and I'm grateful for that. It's commission-based. We utilize the expertise of our residents, and certainly we have expertise from the Financial Advisory Commission. I thank them for their work. The process for this budget began with a foundation of planning, and that's in the Germantown 2030 strategic plan. We utilize this plan and the expertise of our department heads, along with our budget and performance team, to develop a budget that responds to the needs of our residents. And it is once the budget is formulated, it is reviewed by the FAC with over 20 experts in their field. Again, I'm grateful for them and the work that they've done. I'd also like to thank the entire staff, as Alderman Gibson pointed out, from department heads to administration to our budget and finance team for putting together a budget that I believe is very responsible and responsive. I was thrilled, as Alderman Barzizza stated, this budget has been fluid, this process has been fluid, and I appreciate administration's willingness to work with Alderman Barzizza's suggestion and others, our suggestion for parks, to modify this budget to what we felt like at least I felt sincerely that I was a part of this budget in crafting it and modifying it based on the needs that I saw. Certainly based on my liaison to the Parks and Recreation Commission, we talked about how we wanted to see in the future CIP years some monies dedicated for that parkland acquisition because we knew how important that was. So I'd just like to say I appreciate your responsiveness to us, and that'll be my first rounds of remarks.
Thank you. The motion's been brought forward and properly second. More discussion?
Yes, thank you.
Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor. I know, speaking directly to the municipal school district, I was going to reserve some of my comments for that next agenda item, but I think that it bears conversation now. We talk a lot in the budget cycle about process, and I'm pleased with the progress that I believe the district and the city has made with these recent talks, not only for security with Mr. Heisman representing the city, for the superintendent, Mr. Cathy, Mr. Jones, many others there at the district. I'm very pleased to see that. What I would like to see moving forward, and it's a conversation for how we continue to improve, I'd like to see since we are that approval authority, I'd like to see GMSD submit that 5-year CIP, just like the city does. I know that y'all are working toward that, and I don't lose sight of the fact that we are a 4-year district, a 4-year-old district. But I would like to see that 5-year CIP that your board, the Municipal School District Board, has approved, then come to the city, submitting it that with any capital funding that addresses those needs that look from FY20 to years beyond. Number two, as far as that 5-year CIP and the capital budget, I'd like to see the district use the capital contributions as the primary funding source for all projects, prioritizing and allocating the projects over that 5-year period. Again, y'all got the annual contribution amount with the unrestricted fund reserves, keeping those in mind. So the capital needs that are urgent, I consider security needs urgent, immediate in nature that exceed the district's annual capital contribution and those unrestricted fund reserves, those should be submitted to the city in the same manner that every other department head within our city does that for consideration in the process. And so I think that this can help us moving forward because it is the responsibility of your funding body to make sure that you have what you need. And I think that by your elected officials that serve on the funding body, meeting with each of the board members as well as superintendent and staff, that we can come to a greater understanding. I think that that's what we're doing. We are only 4 years old. We've accomplished a lot. I do consider it a partnership. We've learned when it comes to budgets that we can do anything. We just can't do everything at once. And so let us help you and you help us. So I would ask for that to be forthcoming. I think, again, that as we look to better meet the needs of our citizens, we have everyone to look at. Your mission is students. Ours are the citizens of Germantown, and that's what we want to accomplish. So we're going to work together on that. So I'm going to ask the district to strongly consider that component that I believe is missing right now with our facility maintenance. If we can get this done, that deferred maintenance that I lived with Shelby County Schools, for 2023, to think that we can eradicate that, that is significant. But what I would like to see is a representative from our city on that facility maintenance committee. Whether that is Mr. Heisman, I'll let administration and the district, and it may not just be that. We have a wonderful resource in Reynold Douglas. We have people that can assist with that, and I believe that that will bridge the gap. If there is a communication gap, I believe that they can bridge that gap by reducing the number of those unanticipated capital needs requests. No surprises. Some people like them. I don't, especially when it comes to budgets, money. So again, as the district's funding body, we've got to be able to maintain the integrity of the process, and I think that this can help us do that in a fiscally responsible way. One other question. Actually, I'm going to save that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor, and your CIP recommendations are embraced by administration and well thought through. Floor is open. Any other discussion? Alderman Yonda.
Yes, I want to bring a point out that the emails that I sent were asking for advice from the FAC. The BMA sets the tax rate, not the FAC. I just wanted to have information that we were talked about, the 2 cents or 4 cents, however it came out, and I sent them. They also asked me several other questions on different things, which I followed up on after the last meeting. But we set the tax rate, not the BMA. Also, before I became an alderman, I was heavily involved in my Germantown schools. I don't remember seeing necessarily everybody there that seems to have the knowledge that we talked about the 15 cents and how it was coming to us. There is no way we could pay for all the school expenses with just 2.5 cents or the half cent that we're asking for, the half cent, excuse me. That was a way to pay a 15 cent without the increase in our tax rate. We are paying considerably more than 15 cents. That was never, ever brought forward for the schools. It was just a means to pay that amount. Never. And people who believe that it was going to pay for all the schools are greatly mistaken. And I'm sorry that they thought that. But we did not bring that up. We did not tell them it was going to take care of all of it. And we pay considerably more, and we will be paying considerably more to make these schools even greater. And I don't think any of us have a problem with that. The security situation, it's a good idea. I worry that we're going after grants, but may not be able to get that, but we need to move forward on it if we can get it done during the summer. I believe the FAC would agree to that also. It's important to understand that we are the decision makers on all this, not the FAC. I appreciate their information. I rely on it considerably. And I email them questions all the time. And it's just an advisory commission, as all our commissions are in a sense. But I'm tired of hearing the fact that citizens believe we were going to pay for it with our half cent. It wasn't put that way. It never was. And I'm sorry if they felt like they were misled. I don't know who started that rumor, but it wasn't my Germantown schools, because we understood exactly what we were doing. And let's just move forward. Let's keep going and make these schools as great as they are, especially with the staff that we've got at the schools and the staff that we have in our city. We need to be going forward, not looking backwards. Thanks.
Thank you, Alderman. Any other questions?
Yes.
Alderman Massey?
So, Mr. Moody, I want to direct some comments to you first. City Administrator made some comments. My comments aren't directed as any type of cross-examination of you. I'm just trying to get to the information that allows me to make my decisions. And inevitably, there will be members of this board who point to the commissions and say that their decisions were based on the recommendations of the commissions. And so we need to know how the FAC reached their decisions. And there's no record of that right now. I've requested it. The administration hasn't turned that over to me. So my question to you are just trying to arrive at the truth. That's all it was. I appreciate all of your work, and thank you for answering my questions to the best of your ability. And I will move on to my next subject. You know, for me, the conversation about schools is really a matter of how we set our priorities. I think that there are projects out there that we're placing before things in our schools that should have been a priority first. You know, whether it's a $500,000 streetscape project or some other issue, I think for me, I would have placed some of our school expenses before those other budget items. And so that's one of the things I was trying to get the board to understand when we had the joint meeting with the school board. You know, a lot of it is just a matter of prioritization. So I have requested quite a bit of information from the administration, and the administration hasn't produced that information for me. And with that in mind, I can't with good conscience vote to approve this budget. You know, being asked to approve funds for a sewer system, parks, or outdoor venues only gives a surface view of the details that should be considered by each member of this board. And I don't have those details at this time. And it's not because I haven't requested some of them. I have requested some of them. You know, we each have different backgrounds and experience from which we draw from to fulfill our responsibilities as elected officials. And frankly, our residents expect each of us to ask different questions. Whether individually we understand why the other alderman's asking those questions or not, it doesn't matter. Each alderman should be able to have access to the information that he requests to fulfill his own personal responsibilities as an elected official. And I can tell each of my colleagues on this board that I have not received the information that I've requested, including the emails that were passed back and forth from the FAC. So with that, I'll conclude my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Motion's on the table, has been properly moved and seconded. Any more discussion? Please call the roll.
Alderman Owens,
Yes.
Alderman Yonda,
Yes.
Alderman Barzizza,
I'm abstaining.
Vice Mayor Gibson,
Yes.
Alderman Massey.
No.
Motion carries. That takes us to item number 11 on the agenda, ordinance number 2018-2, year-end budget adjustments, second reading. Mr. Lawton.
Give me half a second to move a couple things around.
A minute.
We can take a brief recess. Just please be back within 3 minutes. Yep. We are adjourned for a recess.
Yeah, run. Don't ask what's in water. Yeah. We give her a hard time every day.
This meeting forward. All aldermen are here on the dais. That brings us to item number 11 on the agenda. Ordinance number 2018-2, year-end budget adjustments, second reading. Mr. Lawton.
Thank you, Mayor and Board. Concurrent with the adoption of the budget on an annual basis, the Board actually is adjusting the current FY18 budget, so we have that in shape and in line when the auditors come in late July and August to look at what changed during the fiscal year. And all those changes have to be approved by this body. At the first reading on the budget adjustment 2018-2, the Board approved 2 budget adjustments, police car equipment and GAC renovation change orders, and I explained to those what those were at that time. The additional budget adjustments include an adjustment to align the general fund operating and transfers with cost and timing of certain projects in the capital improvements budget. There's an additional transfer for the ambulance service, budget 18-97 budget adjustment, rather budget 1897. There's been a shift in the ratio of private pay to government pay insurance. As a result of this shift, the higher number of government pay users has lowered the overall revenues and thus a greater transfer from the general fund. There's a budget adjustment for GPAC regarding coverage in the bar and concession project, and a budget adjustment in sanitation to take care of the higher than budgeted yard waste disposal and recycling expenses. Yard waste volume is 20% higher than it was last year, and recycling is up 186% higher. And then finally, in economic and community development, a budget adjustment to clean up a lot of the grass cutting and cleanup in actually one particular area, Germantown Manor, which continues to be a problem area for the city, where the property owner is not cutting the lots. There are several lots, and the city actually has to go in and expend dollars, general fund dollars, to take care of that. Now, we absolutely put a lien on the property for that, but rather than have that continue, and there was a substantial amount that we had to spend for that. Those are the budget adjustments at second reading. There probably will be more, a few more, I anticipate, at the third and final reading.
Thank you, Mr. Lawton. Is there a motion to approve ordinance number 2018-2 for year-end budget adjustments on second reading and set Monday, June 25th, 2018 for third and final reading?
Move to approve.
It's a motion.
Second.
It's a motion and a second. At this time, I will declare a public hearing be open. Anyone who would like to come forth and speak to the board on this particular agenda item on budget adjustments, please come forward. Is there anyone who would like to come forward and speak on this particular item? Third and final call. See no one come forward. That concludes the public hearing portion of this agenda item. Motion's been properly moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion?
Mayor, what were the CIP transfers?
Mr. Lawton?
1896.
I don't have the backup in front of me. But the CIP transfer, so at the beginning of the budget, I'm sorry. So at the beginning of 18, we allot a certain amount of money to be transferred from the general fund into each of the CIP funds based on the number of projects and dollar amounts. And as the year goes along, then we need to adjust those transfers. So the overall transfer amount doesn't change. It's just moving them around to whether or not a project was rejected and they didn't do it at all. It was less, it was more. We need to change those transfer to match the dollar amount and the timing.
I guess my question, though, is what are the projects?
Oh, I don't have those in front of me.
Okay, would you mind getting those to the board?
You're talking about all projects and what they came in as?
These are your 4 transfer items on the CIP worksheet that's in front of the packet. Would that be?
But those are for the grouping. So for Fund 32, which is the general fund, as we go through to do estimate costs, then as a total, we determine what is left in the fund, how much was expended, and then how much we need to adjust the transfers.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I think you probably have that set up in a spreadsheet for each one. So if you want to just send the spreadsheet, I think that'll be fine, as long as we can recognize the individual projects.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Please call the roll.
Alderman Yonda,
Yes.
Alderman Barzizza,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Gibson,
Yes.
Alderman Massey,
Yes.
Alderman Owens.
Yes.
Motion carries. Move to third and final reading. Brings us to item 12 on the agenda, ordinance number 2018-3, real and personalty property taxes, second reading and public hearing. Mr. Gabb?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. The Board of Mayor and Aldermen, the Aldermen are being asked to approve at second reading and public hearing the real and personal property tax rate of $1.95 for the fiscal year 2019, which will support the adoption of the FY19 budget. A little background, as we covered last time, may be helpful and useful. The Shelby County Assessor reappraised the property in Shelby County, as was required by the state statute, every 4 years, and submitted to the City of Germantown the tax rolls by April the 20th of 2017 for the calendar year 2017 or fiscal year 2018, which contained the reappraisal of property. The city at that time calculated a state certified tax rate or a rollback rate that would produce a tax neutral effect as required by the Tennessee law. Upon calculating the rollback, the city, based upon history, calculated an estimated appeal allowance. This was submitted to the Shelby County Assessor for approval and to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. It was then submitted and accepted by the Tennessee State Board of Equalization. The city had until March 31st of the following year to use the allowance, or a new certified tax rate would be calculated by the State Board of Equalization. The State Board of Equalization received from the Shelby County Assessor a fiscal impact summary that showed that 44.34% of the 4 cents was used, or 2 cents was used, of the appeal allowance. The appeal allowance requested was $37,815,831, and the actual appeals were $16,767,115. The fiscal impact summary was dated April 5th, submitted to the State Board of Equalization by the Shelby County Board of Appeals. The State Board of Equalization on April the 26th submitted to the City of Germantown and Shelby County Assessor its recalculation of the recapture rate to be $1.95. This demonstrates and provides for the true checks and balances along with transparency for the local municipal governments by the State Board of Equalization. If a local government decides to keep the additional appeal allowance, then the local government would have a tax increase and must publish to the public in a separate notice of its intent of increasing the tax rate. The recapture rate is less than the current tax rate of $1.97 by 2 pennies. Therefore, you are being asked to adopt ordinance number 2018-3, establishing a new certified tax rate of $1.95 on second and public reading, and to set Monday, June the 25th, 2018 for a third reading. I'm available for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Gabb. Is there a motion to adopt ordinance number 2018-3, establishing the certified tax rate at $1.95 on second reading, and to set Monday, June 25th, 2018 for third and final reading?
Move to approve.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. At this time, I will open public hearing. Public hearing is now open and declared. Does anyone who would like to come forward and speak on this particular item? Would anyone like to come forward and speak on the tax adjustment for the City of Germantown? Third and final call. Anyone who would like to come forward? Seeing no one come forward, that concludes the public hearing portion of this agenda item. We return to the question. Any questions or discussion? Please call the roll.
Mayor, I did have I'm sorry, I couldn't get my button on fast.
Go ahead, Alderman.
So, Mr. Gabb,
Yes, sir.
for me personally, I think it's a little misleading for anyone on this board to take credit for the tax rate going from $1.97 to $1.95 and call it a tax reduction that we can take credit for, because it was really the state that came back and gave the 2 cents back to the taxpayers. I'm not asking you to respond. I'm just letting you know how I feel about it in response to you given the opening presentation. You know, the reality is the proposed tax rate is the state's FY18 certified tax rate of $1.76, less 2 cents for the certified recapture rate for the appeals allowance that was used, plus the 21-cent tax increase that was recommended by the mayor and approved by Alderman Gibson, Yonda, and Owens, which Alderman Barzizza and I opposed. You know, I warned the public that the mayor's administration was recommending a tax increase before it was necessary and possibly creating a windfall for the city on the back of a reappraisal year while using a new school and loss of the halls tax as political cover.
Point of order quickly. You can't speak to my personal motivation, and you are speaking to that. You can continue with your statement, but in essence, you are defining how I presented something last year in the budget cycle. Continue, sir.
Mayor, I am telling you what I said.
Continue, please.
So, the 21-cent tax increase was not necessary last year, and I contend the board should admit the mistake and vote to reduce the tax rate by 21 cents for FY19. But in an effort to compromise with the majority, I'm going to propose a motion that only calls for an 11-cent reduction in the tax rate, which will leave the 10 cents allocated for the school bond in place and set the new tax rate at $1.84. At this point, I move to reduce the tax rate by 11 cents and set the new tax rate at $1.84.
Is that in the form of a motion?
Yes, Mayor, it is.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been motioned and properly seconded. I have a question on behalf of administration since you brought this forward. What amount of financial analysis have you done to support this? What does this do to our comprehensive budget for police, fire, public safety, our school funding to reduce things? Have you done any fiscal analysis or gotten with staff to do any fiscal analysis of your proposal?
Well, the ratios, I think, bear out that this will not change our ability to maintain the funding.
How so? You can ask us questions on how we present the budget and how they lead to, again, financial stability in our community. When you bring forward a proposal like this, you need to be able to back that up as well.
Sure. Well, one of the things I was going to ask staff to do, you know, unlike you, I don't have the ability to get staff to do some of these things on my demand.
You can meet with staff anytime you want. Your colleagues do it all the time.
I understand that, Mayor. We got our packet, I think, last Thursday.
The budget's been out for 6 months.
I understand that. We didn't know what you were going to propose. So I'll keep going. I think at this point, you know, the appropriate thing going forward between now and the third reading is for staff to take this recommendation, if it's approved by the majority, and give us those numbers. It hasn't been approved yet. You know, would you have allowed me to ask staff to do this work without having the consent of the majority? Because in other occasions when I've asked the staff to do things for me, you've prohibited them from doing it.
That's not accurate.
It's very accurate, Mayor, and the record will reflect that.
That's not accurate, sir. Continue or surrender the floor.
Well, you asked me questions. Are you done with your questions? I mean, the general fund balance.
You have the floor.
I think Mr. Lawton would probably conclude that the general fund balance would support this. Now, we've already admitted that the tax rate is going to carry us for a whole nother year. So that means we applied it too soon last year. So all we're doing is giving the taxpayers back the money that they shouldn't have been taxed for a year too early. It's pretty simple.
Mr. Lawton?
Thank you, Mayor. You know, again, per the city's charter, which we follow, the budget is the city administrator's budget, and I present that to the board after working with the finance committee. At that point, it is the alderman's budget. I think I need to say this to the alderman as you're considering this motion, that this would be reckless, this would be dangerous. 11-cent decrease to the tax rate would destroy the 5-year funding model. It would put in jeopardy our ability to pay our bond indebtedness, and it certainly would probably destroy the AAA bond rating. This is not how we do process when it comes to budgeting. This is the first time we've heard this presentation. There's no way. You had indicated that we can do that for another year. We don't do one-year budgets. We do a 5-year financial plan. That's why Germantown, in terms of our finances, is the envy of the state. And that's why we have a AAA bond rating. I would recommend to the board not to approve a reduction in the tax rate.
Alderman Barzizza.
But Mr. Lawton, you stated yourself that because of the sales tax, increase in sales taxes, and that we have essentially earned an extra year plus property tax increase. So going forward, we're in the 6 years. Is that correct?
Yes, but it's a combination of things, Alderman Barzizza. It's a combination of, we hope the economy continues, but we budget very conservatively. We could have a recession in 2 years. Who knows what that will do to us? We saw what it did in 2008. We don't want to be so dependent upon what's considered elastic taxes, such as sales taxes, because they can come and go with the economy. Our bread and butter, as I mentioned, is the property tax, so we budget very conservatively. And it's not just the increase in sales tax, which we love to see in things coming online. It's everything that goes into the budget process. It's looking at our expenditures and controlling that growth during the 5-year planning period. It's looking at how much we can pull out of reserves and pay for capital projects versus issuing debt. You can't hang your hat on one thing and say, well, sales tax is going to save us, and that's what brought us the other year. It didn't. It's everything else combined, and our projections are so conservative. We're looking at probably a 2% increase in sales tax next year. The property taxes, it's everything combined. Those are just separate components. And again, we do a 5-year financial plan. We don't do one-year budgeting. There's a number of communities that do one-year budgeting at a time, and they pull down the reserves and they drop the tax rate, and then they're left, trying to make some very difficult decisions in terms of how to fund basic services in their community. That has never been the case in City of Germantown because we do prudent financial planning. The 5-year plan works. We're very conservative. It's not just one thing, Alderman Barzizza, that's allowing us to get that 5th year. A lot of it has to do with how your department heads manage their resources during that period of time.
The town of Collierville has somewhat of an over-reliance on sales tax, and now we see what they're having to fool with this year. There's been a motion for an amendment, and it's been properly seconded. Please call the roll.
Alderman Massey?
Yes.
Alderman Owens?
No.
Alderman Yonda?
No.
Alderman Barzizza?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Gibson?
No.
The motion for the amendment does not carry. We move to the original question. Please call the roll.
Alderman Barzizza?
Abstain.
Vice Mayor Gibson?
Yes.
Alderman Massey?
We're
Alderman
voting on
Massey?
the $1.95 rate, correct?
That's the way the motion is written.
Yes.
Alderman Owens?
Yes.
Alderman Yonda?
Yes.
Motion carries. We move to item 13 on the agenda, ordinance number 2018-4, Germantown Municipal School District year-end budget adjustments, second reading and public hearing. Mr. Lawton.
Thank you, Mayor. Much like the board just approved with the city's year-end budget adjustments at second reading, the Germantown Municipal School District also has a number of year-end budget adjustments to align their budget so it can be complete and in order at the end of the fiscal year prior to the audit beginning. All of their budget adjustments, and they're attached to here, they've added a few more, have been vetted through the administration and the finance office at GMSD and also approved by the Germantown Board of Education. But again, much like this body's approval of the overall budget for GMSD, you are also asked to approve, which essentially is an amendment to their FY18 budget. And if you have any questions, Mr. Jones or Mr. Manuel are here to address those.
Thank you, Mr. Lawton. Is there a motion to approve ordinance number 2018-4 for the Germantown Municipal School District year-end budget adjustments on second reading and to set Monday, June 25th, 2018 for third and final reading?
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second. I now open the public hearing on this particular agenda item. Is there anyone in the attendance this evening who'd like to come forward and speak on year-end budget adjustments for our school district? Anyone would like to come forward? Please come forward at this time. Third and final call. See no one come forward. The public hearing now is concluded. We return to the question. It's been properly moved and seconded. Any discussion? Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Superintendent Manuel, I know you're excited about the new elementary school. I know we've had much discussion, and with excitement comes a little bit of anxiousness, I would imagine. But I want to talk with you about operating expenses for the new school. I know you're a planner, and I know we've discussed several times what the needs are for that new school. So not only just for opening doors, but those operating expenses. Do you have a funding plan in place, and can you share either a little bit of that? We want to make sure that you have what you need.
Sure, most definitely. Well, as my board had requested us to do, we've done a fiscal analysis to talk about what would be the cost. And so when the school is fully implemented and fully open, it's approximately $2.8 million. And what we're talking about doing is, if we just have a shell game and we move the students from our existing schools and put them in the new elementary school, you've got to pay the salary for a new principal, assistant principals, counselors, you've got librarians. So there are increased costs in running a new school, even if you have the same amount of revenue from the same number of students. But know that that is a transition. So as we open this new school with our existing numbers of students, we're talking about opening, and it depends on the school zone, between 430 and 500 students at that new elementary school, and it's built for 800 students. So know that we won't open with the full complement of staff that we have at that school. So as we open the new elementary school, it'll probably have reduced staff, and we have to look at the numbers. So we'll probably have a principal and just have one assistant principal, maybe one counselor there. So we have to look at those numbers as we're opening the new elementary school. We have budgeted conservatively, so we have put increases in costs like sales tax, property tax. We try to mirror the city and what they do with their budgeting process into non-recurring cost. And so we have identified $1.7 million in funding that we have right now that are in non-recurring budgets for that type. So we transition. So as the new students come to the elementary school and as the city grows and we move from 430 students to the 800 students, the revenue coming with those students offsets the cost of the school.
Just to follow up, that was a categorical yes. You have what you need to open those doors. Thank you.
Any other questions? Please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Gibson?
Yes.
Alderman Massey?
Yes.
Alderman Owens?
Yes.
Alderman Yonda?
Yes.
Alderman Barzizza?
Yes.
Motion carries, and I will say that our friends at the school district, we admire your long hours, and it's summertime. If you want to keep the long hours, you can stay here, but you can leave now if you like. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for being here and being patient with us tonight. Brings us to item 14 on the agenda, ordinance number 2018-06, amendment to modify the term of Design Review Commission, third and final reading. Mr. Ross.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the board. This is the third and final reading for ordinance 2018-6 to modify the terms of the DRC. The request in front of you is a part of a discussion that we've had over the last two readings related to continuity of knowledge and knowledge transfer opportunities for those members of the board. And by doing this, we could extend those terms to 2 years, stagger those terms so that we could do part education and part knowledge transfer as some members transfer off the board. The change in front of you at third and final reading is to section 2169 of the municipal code and as well as to the bylaws of the DRC to change those terms, length of terms from 1 year to 2 year. The top of page 2 on your agenda sheet, you'll see that we've struck 1 and added 2 years. And we've also added language, appointments shall be staggered so that only 1/2 of the members shall be appointed in alternate years. Implementation shall be done by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. That's the new language that's being added. Again, that's in section 2169 of the ordinance. Available for any questions on third and final reading.
Thank you, Mr. Ross. Is there a motion to approve on third and final reading, ordinance 2018-6, amendment to modify section 2-169 of the Germantown Municipal Code to change the length of the term of the Design Review Commission members.
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion?
Mayor, is this going to apply to existing members when we sit to approve these members for the DRC in January? Is it January, December?
December.
So December, when we sit in December to approve these members, are we going to be giving some of the existing members an additional year, or are we only applying this to the members that are appointed in December?
Mr. Ross or Attorney, do you want to handle that?
It's the intent that currently, under 2169 of the ordinance, those terms are for 1 year. So every member that is currently serving on the DRC, if they want to continue to serve, will have to apply for another term. And as part of those term requests, at least for this first year, those people applying, either new members or existing members as part of their application, will need to select whether they want to do 1 or 2 years. It'll be a discussion that we have with existing members, but as implemented on other commissions where those terms have changed, some members have elected to go with the first 1-year term because they don't know. So on a commission of 9 members, 5 would take 2-year terms and 4 would take a 1-year term to start this off, so that it could be that staggered, with the majority 5 having a 2-year term. And that was,
to further add to that, the first year is obviously a transition year. And so there won't be any change until calendar year 2019. So what I would expect is there will be some nominees, as Mr. Ross said, for 2-year terms first year, some for 1-year term first year, and then this ordinance will be operative going forward. But we've had this in other situations, and you just work through it the first year.
at their meeting, when they discussed it in the background section of the agenda sheet, they did talk about how this would be implemented, and so some are already considering whether they want to continue in another one-year term or ask for 2. So they're actively considering this as we approach application time starting in October.
Okay.
Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Alderman Massey?
Yes.
Alderman Owens?
Yes.
Alderman Yonda?
Yes.
Alderman Barzizza?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Gibson?
Yes.
Motion carries. It takes us to item 15 on the agenda, contract Farmington Park Playground renovation Phase 1. Ms. Beasley.
Okay, thanks. Everybody, I'm here to request your approval in authorizing the mayor to enter into a construction contract with Legacy Construction Services for the renovation and construction for the Farmington Park Playground Phase 1 in the amount of $378,600 and to approve budget adjustment number 18-92. As you know, Farmington Park is one of the city's 4 school park classifications, meaning that the public park property also serves the needs of the students attending those schools as well as the neighborhood. You'll remember the major playground upgrades that were performed at Riverdale and Dogwood Park in 2010 and 2011. An upgrade should take place at Farmington Park to serve the students and the families in that neighborhood as well. Funding was included in the FY18 budget in the amount of $306,000 to replace the existing playground equipment. I'd like to take just a minute and review the planning process that the Park Commission used for this project. The Commission put together a steering committee made up of school administrators, teachers, neighborhood representatives, our staff from the REACH program, and other city departments and recreation staff. The school also engaged the students at the classroom level, asking the students what they wanted at their new playground. The The teachers reported that the students described an American Ninja Warrior type playground equipment with ropes and climbers, something that they could be active in and really address their health and wellness needs. This information was provided to our design team in order to create a preliminary design. A public open house was held. A public open house was held at Farmington so that the preliminary plan could be seen by the public. Those members of the public that were unable to attend were invited to view the plan via a social media link. There were several reoccurring comments that the design team and the project steering committee saw after those public comments were released. Those included adding more inclusion play features, adding a few more traditional play features like slides, and keeping the basketball court. The commission was provided a survey that was put online with almost 300 responses for their review. It should be noted that the basketball courts seem to be the hot topic with varied responses. Some individuals thought that keeping the basketball courts with only one hoop and more youth-friendly would be a better option. Some neighbors requested that the basketball courts be removed. However, the public comments, the majority of the public comments that we collected were to keep the full-length basketball courts. In working with the steering committee and considering community input, recommendations for the park improvements expanded from just replacing the play equipment to also resolving site drainage, creating separate age-appropriate play spaces, addressing ADA accessibility, adding a walking path, and converting a basketball court to a multi-use space, and creating a safe and visible entrance and addressing the parking lot issues. So I'll note, as a part of the original project scope increased, it was decided to separate the project into 2 phases and apply for a local Parks and Recreation Fund grant, which we did, and submitted that on April the 8th to expand the funding source. Your agenda sheet will reflect that this project followed the proper protocol for construction project bidding, as reflected in your agenda sheet. Finally, after thorough review of all our qualified bids, and we had 5, Legacy Construction Services is the lowest bidder with a base bid of amount of $349,975. Though this bid exceeds our original budget, it should be noted that the scope of the project was also increased as the community provided information on their true needs. Staff is recommending accepting of their 3 bid alternates that's also in your agenda sheet, which would take the trail on your map and include a flush curb around the walking trail to make it more appealing and safe, and installation of park furnishings. The money designated for the general advancement of the park master plan is being recommended as the additional funding source of this phase 1. I also need to note that this project is also in keeping with our Germantown Forward 2030 plan of providing a high quality of life and stewardship of our assets. Within your packet, there is a site map that also includes the phased funding plan. And on that map, all of the elements that are in the aqua color would be for this phase 1, the walking trail, 3 of the play structures, and the entrance and the drainage projects. And if you've got any questions, I'll be glad to address those.
Thank you, Ms. Beasley. Excellent presentation. Is there a motion to approve a construction contract with Legacy Construction Services for the renovation and construction of the Farmington Park Playground Phase 1 in the amount of $378,600 and to approve budget adjustment number 18-92.
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any discussion? Vice Mayor.
After Alderman Owens,
Oh.
the liaison. Go ahead.
Thank you, Alderman Gibson. Just a couple of comments, and mostly you've mentioned these, Pam, and I know the answers to these, but I think for the public's information, the main point, I think, is we had originally envisioned this really being playground equipment. And through the public participation process, for which I will applaud you and your staff for going through this process, I think it was a great example of utilizing public participation process. Well, we expanded the scope of the project to include drainage, to include all the things you mentioned, separate play areas, the walking path. All those were desired by not only the neighborhood and the school, and so they kind of worked in concert together. I was pleased with the number of bids that we had, and good bids, and obviously we got what I think is a deal in a low bid, and so I guess that's just only comments, no real questions. Just wanted to get that on the record.
Thank you, Alderman. Vice Mayor.
Just a real quick question, Pam. As far as the expansion, the age-appropriate play areas, ADA accessibility, walking path, were the park furnishings in that, or was that one of the add-ons?
It was an alternate. An
alternate bid.
Yes,
I want to echo Alderman Owens' sentiments as far as the process. I believe through your efforts and yours as well, Alderman Owens, Chairman Young, and the Park Commission, citizens came together to build a better park, and I'm looking forward to seeing what happens there. We've done such a great job going to each of those larger parks, Dogwood, Elementary, Riverdale, and I think the folks around Farmington are going to be getting something special there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions? Go ahead.
Ms. Beasley, on the request for budget transfer appropriation, it's showing current budget of $530,791 for professional services. What are those professional services for?
I can answer that, Pam. That's the park dollars left in the park master plan. We were going to try and in addition to complete the work of the park master plan, the thought was let's allocate some funds to try to do at least some project this year in implementing the master plan. As the board will recall, we had $1 million in streetscape, and I believe it was Alderman Owens suggested that we pull some of that for park master plan, so that the balance of that project, and Pam, correct me if I'm wrong, is coming from dollars left over in that project line item.
So, Ms. Beasley, am I correct when I look at this and I see the $97,600? I think this is what Mr. Lawton has said, is that the $97,600 is coming out of the parks master plan, but it's showing it as professional services for the Farmington Parks plan. So that's why there was a little bit of confusion. Do you know why we showed it as professional services for Farmington, for the Farmington project?
Alderman, I don't know if I'm seeing that, but Mr. Lawton is correct. The funding source is coming from the Park Master Plan CIP project. So where are you seeing professional services?
It's just before you get to your Farmington Park Playground Master Plan.
Okay.
That's, I'm assuming, Alderman Master, you're looking at the budget adjustment?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that shows, if you look current budget, 53791, pulling 97.6 out of that and transfer it into other improvements for that particular capital project, thereby giving the total proposed budget, which is in line with the bid, of $378,000. So again, those dollars that were in the park master plan we weren't quite sure what we'd use those for, but the thought was we could try to get something accomplished, either design work, probably more design work and not so much construction. That's why you see it as professional services in this fiscal year. But when you think about the use of those dollars now, it's absolutely an appropriate use as we're implementing the park master plan, which would be a component of that.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
That's correct.
Ms. Beasley, you and I talked. You know, one of my concerns from the beginning has been the lack of clarity on how we're going to use the money that we're budgeting for Parks Master Plan or Farmington Parks. It's just like the plan is ever evolving, the costs are ever increasing, and I have some real concerns about that because, you know, how much was the Parks Master Plan in total? Do you remember?
I think it was 165,000 for the plan.
Yeah, but the total cost for us to do all the Parks Master Plan, all the renovations, it was in the millions. I don't remember.
72 million.
Multi-million.
So
and
72
over,
million. So
and
if we,
over decades.
so my concern is that if we continue to have these kind of cost increases for each project that we go along with, then we're going to keep going back to the taxpayer and saying, we need a little bit more, we need a little bit more, and I just don't know if that's sustainable. So we've got phase 1 of Farmington Park now. So what is the total cost increase projected for phase 1 and phase 2? I mean, what are we looking at for total cost increase for this project?
All that will depend on the market and the construction costs, but I think my comment to you, Alderman, and what will be helpful and what I'm committed to and what the Park Commission is committed to, you develop a plan that's conceptual in the beginning, but every time that you go to implement any part of that plan, you start by talking to the community to see if that plan is still relevant, to see if we need to add anything, do we need to subtract anything. And so really, honestly, this master plan for Farmington Park was one of the first exercises that we did in implementing the master plan. So whether it's working with the horse show to expand or developing municipal park, we're always going to go back to those stakeholders, to that community, and yes, things will change. All we can do when we budget is to come up with a good faith estimate, depend on our contractors, our planners to let us know how many dollars we need to put in the budget and go from there. But I don't think when we're doing a project that we're doing a service to our community, and especially in this case our schools, not to engage them. And if there are things that they said, you know, I know you didn't plan for a walking trail when you budgeted this $306,000. However, we really need it. This would support our PE program. We'd like to have a track out there. We didn't intend to do anything new with the basketball court, but that was a very, as I use the word, hot topic. And so, you know, we have to listen to the community, and in this case, the neighbors and the school. And yes, that drove the cost up, but we're trying to get it right. And so that's what I would tell you that I believe that we did. I think we got this one right.
And phase 2, Alderman, your question about the total cost of the project, we've identified $430,000 in FY19 for phase 2 of this project. Half of that we anticipate getting in a grant from TDEC.
That's right.
Any other questions? Alderman Barzizza?
So the number was, you told me this afternoon that the number was about 800,000.
Close to it when we when all is said and done, yes, sir.
Yeah.
It will be, Farmington Park will be again one of the first elements of the master plan to be completed, and it will be a destination park and well deserved in that neighborhood. We haven't done any large improvements like that. And as one of the aldermen said, it's not doing the school a favor. We owe it to the school to make that playground what it should be.
Any other questions?
Mayor?
Yes.
I'm not going to oppose this project tonight, but I think going forward, we have to be really considerate about these cost increases associated with this parks project so that this doesn't get to the point where we're treating our taxpayers like an ATM. You know, anytime somebody wants something, we go back to them and say, hey, we're going to increase this project by $96,000. I think the budget's intended to restrain government, and I think we need to really consider that going forward in dealing with our expenses associated with this parks master plan.
Alderman, too, I think it's important, and I know how passionate you are about the schools. On this particular project, I really feel like I'm going to call this a 2-for-1. It's not only a public park, but it is supporting the school system. And unlike Riverdale and Dogwood, those schools have recess options besides just the adjoining park. Farmington Park doesn't, and so if we have to put a few extra dollars into that park, we're spending tax dollars for the neighborhood, but also for the school, which I heard all of you say is very important.
Thank you. Please, Alderman Yonda.
Sorry, I'm always concerned about increases too like this. The main reason for this increase, again, is your communication with the community, the neighbors and the school. That's where all of this is coming from, or is it just? Yes. Okay, just want to be clear on that. Thank you.
Please call the roll.
Alderman Owens?
Yes.
Alderman Yonda?
Yes.
Alderman Barzizza?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Gibson?
Yes.
Alderman Massey?
Yes.
You have approval. We're very excited. The other two projects that you've done in the past where you've leveraged a lot of private dollars with public dollars were well worth it. We know that'll be the case with this one as well. We'll get hot and sweaty this summer when we build it together, right? All right. Thank you. Thank you, Pam. This takes us to item 16 on the agenda, right-of-way acquisition, legal and title fees, Track 1, Germantown Road, Wolf River Boulevard Intersection Improvement Project. Mr. Gwaltney.
Thank you, Mayor. The purpose of this agenda item is to request BMA approval of reimbursement in the amount of $7,500 to GNI Roman numeral 8 Brook Chase LLC for legal and title fees associated with right-of-way acquisition of Track 1 related to the Wolf River Boulevard Germantown Road Intersection Improvement Project. For the past year, the city has been acquiring the necessary rights-of-way to improve the intersection of Wolf River and Germantown roads. One of those tracks is the Retreat apartment complex owned by GNI 8 Brook Chase and is referred to in the city's road plans as Track Number 1. Acquisition of Track 1 was originally brought to and approved by the BMA on February 12th of this year. The administrative settlement agreement contained language to reimburse the owners for lender and legal fees for an amount not to exceed $7,800. We received lender and title fees, the receipts that totaled $7,500 on May 29th, and this constitutes the final payment to the owners. The city has been and will continue to be reimbursed 100% for all expenses on this project. Staff respectfully requests BMA approval of this item, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Gwaltney. Is there a motion to approve the reimbursement of legal and title fees in the amount of $7,500 to GNI 8 Brook Chase LLC associated with right-of-way acquisition of Track 1 and to authorize the disbursement of the reimbursement amount to GNI 8 Brook Chase LLC?
Move to approve.
Is a motion?
I'll second it.
It's a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Alderman Yonda?
Yes.
Alderman Barzizza?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Gibson?
Yes.
Alderman Massey?
Abstain.
Alderman Owens?
Yes.
Motion carries. That brings us to item 17 on the agenda. Final item, right-of-way acquisition, Track 31, Germantown Road, Wolf River Boulevard Intersection Improvement Project. Mr. Gwaltney.
Thank you, Mayor. The purpose of this agenda item is to request BMA approval of a right-of-way acquisition agreement with Mr. Frank P. Yulhorn in the amount of $66,787 for the purchase of real estate and/or easements related to improvements to the intersection of Germantown Road and Wolf River Boulevard and disbursement of the purchase price to the seller. For the past year, the city has been acquiring the necessary rights-of-way to improve the intersection. I'm pleased to report that this track number 31, otherwise known as the Taco Bell site, represents the last track to be acquired for the project. The city's appraiser, Mr. Rand Bolin, appraised the area to be acquired at $60,715. The owner did not accept this appraisal amount, and the negotiations began. The city's negotiator, Mr. Andy Miller, and the owner, Frank Yulhorn, agreed on an amount of $66,787. Mr. Miller recommended that amount to staff for approval, and in turn, we are respectfully recommending approval of that amount to the BMA.
Thank you, Mr. Gwaltney. Is there a motion to approve the right-of-way acquisition of real estate from Frank P. Yulhorn for the total lump sum amount of $66,787 for a portion of Track 31 and authorize the disbursement of the purchase price to the seller. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
I'll be brief.
Alderman Barzizza.
Mr. Quadling, what is the cost per square foot in this property?
This particular,
This 66,000, what's the cost per square foot?
I would have to do the math, but on average, it's
Well,
coming
but
out to
can I
about
make the
$25
recommendation
per
that
square
you
foot.
give to all of us at BMA a copy of the cost per square foot of each and every one of the sites?
Absolutely.
So we can have an idea as to what was paid for by, what we paid for each individual on a per square foot basis, so we can compare and going forward. It's just a little more knowledge for us, even though we're voting on this tonight.
Absolutely, and just to give you a background too, is that providing the appraisals prior to settlement, TDOT had asked us not to make those appraisals public at that point, but yeah.
So this being the last one, you can?
That's correct. Yes.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Alderman Massey.
Mayor, it says that the seller is Frank Yulhorn, and on the last page, it looks like there's two signatures for the seller's acknowledgement of sales price and conditions. Mr. Walding, who are the signatures on there? I can't seem to read those.
Grace.
It's Yulhorn.
On the administrative settlement,
Yes.
that is Gil Yulhorn, which was the representative for Frank, and then Andy Miller, the city's negotiator.
So
He's on attachment 3.
the top signature is who?
Attachment 3.
Gil Yulhorn is his brother.
Frank Yulhorn.
Are you talking about attachment 3? It's Grace
attachment
Yulhorn and Frank Yulhorn.
It's Grace?
Right.
Okay, so you just had his wife sign? I'm trying to figure out, one of the things that I've asked you for on these road realignment things is the list of members of LLCs and the shareholders in the corporations, if that information was available. And that information's never come forward. And so it's just something I like to know. I like to know who the owners are and who the members are in these corporations that we're buying right away from.
Correct. And again, this is, the disclosure ownership form is attached to your packet.
It's attachment 2.
No, sir. It's
Set
the
well.
last attachment.
Oh, sorry.
And it shows one name. And so that's why I was asking that there are, on the seller's acknowledgement page, there are two names. And so that's why I'm asking, why are there two names? I assume it's husband and wife, so.
I don't see where he's talking about.
I think the question's been satisfied. Any other questions?
Well, is there more than one owner in the corporation?
Frank Yulhorn was the, to my knowledge, the 100% owner of the property.
Then how can
Mr.
Gil Yulhorn sign for him?
What's that?
How can Gil Yulhorn sign for him?
He's his
He
attorney.
didn't, he was his legal representation. He did not sign as an owner.
Gil Yulhorn, as the nephew of Mr. Frank Yulhorn, is an attorney at Bassberry Sims and represents him on real estate matters.
Okay, thank you.
Grace Yulhorn is Frank Yulhorn's wife,
Yeah.
so that's why she also signed.
Okay.
Alderman Yonda.
Just to clarify, we're paying this, and then we get 100% reimbursed by the state. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Please call the roll.
Alderman Barzizza?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Gibson,
Yes.
Alderman Massey,
No.
Alderman Owens,
Yes.
Alderman Yonda.
Abstain.
The motion carries. We've reached the conclusion of our business this evening. We are adjourned. Thank you for being here in attendance.